If you like the content I create, please support me with your subscription and a comment. Deep in the Indian subcontinent, long before the idea of India or Pakistan existed, a civilization as advanced as it was mysterious flourished, the Indus Valley Civilization. It emerged over 4,000 years ago on the banks of the Indus and Saraswati rivers, in what is now parts of Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. It was one of the three great ancient civilizations, along with Egypt and Mesopotamia. And yet, unlike these, the Indus civilization disappeared without clear explanation, leaving behind a huge number of unanswered questions. Its main cities, such as Mohenjo, Daro, and Harappa, were incredibly advanced for their time. Straight streets, underground drainage systems, brick buildings, public baths, warehouses, wells, even a kind of sewer system that still amazes archaeologists. All this thousands of years before many other societies even learned to build with symmetry. But what makes this civilization even more enigmatic is that it left no text for us to read. They had a form of writing, small symbols engraved on stone, pottery, or copper seals. However, to this day, no one has been able to decipher what they mean. It is not known whether they were words, numbers, names of gods, laws, or simply trademarks. We know they communicated in writing, but we have no idea what they said. This leaves the Indus civilization trapped in eternal silence. We don't know what language they spoke, what they believed, how they governed themselves, or why they disappeared. Some think they were invaded. Others say a prolonged drought collapsed their agriculture. There are also theories about earthquakes, epidemics, or mass migrations, but there is no definitive answer, only ruins, fragments, and that visual language that we still cannot read. Most disturbing is that many excavations have found no clear traces of war or violence. Their cities seem to have been abandoned little by little, as if one day they simply decided to leave or as if something invisible had forced them to go. They left no monuments to kings, no statues of emperors, no giant tombs. It was a society very different from other great ancient cultures. The Indus Valley Civilization remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of human history. They had knowledge, organization, art, engineering, and yet their voice remains silent, like a buried story that we do not yet know. How to read? Among the eternal sands of Egypt, where secrets seem to lie dormant beneath centuries of history and silence, there is an enigma that still baffles archaeologists and historians: the lost labyrinth of Egypt. This is not a myth invented in modern times, but a structure that was described in detail by Herodotus, the famous Greek historian of the 5th century BC, and he was not the only one. Other travelers in ancient times also claim to have seen it with their own eyes, but today, more than 2,000 years later, no one has found conclusive evidence of its existence. Herodotus claimed that the labyrinth was located near the ancient city of Arsinoe in the Fayum region, south of Cairo. According to his account, this complex was so colossal and detailed that it surpassed even the pyramids in magnificence. He said it contained more than 3,000 rooms organized on 2 levels, one half underground and the other above ground. Some rooms were dedicated to the gods, others to kings. Endless corridors, walls covered with sculptures, ceilings carved with precision, all arranged like a giant puzzle that could disorient even the most attentive visitor. The most striking thing about Herodotus' testimony is his tone of amazement. He, who had seen the pyramids, stated without hesitation that the labyrinth was even more impressive, and he was not the only one to mention this marvel. Pliny the Elder, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus also spoke of this construction, although with variations in the details. They all agreed on one thing: the labyrinth existed. It was gigantic, and it was carefully constructed in stone. So, if so many ancient people saw it, why haven't we found it? That is the big question. Some believe it was destroyed by earthquakes or dismantled to reuse its materials in other constructions. Others think that it simply has not yet been excavated in the right place. For centuries, the Fayum area was ignored by explorers and archaeologists, leaving open the possibility that the labyrinth is still hidden, buried under meters of sand and ruins. In 2008, a team of researchers used radar technology to scan an area near Guira, where some believe the labyrinth is located. They detected large underground structures, aligned in a regular pattern, but to date no full excavation has been carried out to confirm their nature. Perhaps the famous labyrinth still lies beneath that ground. The mystery of Egypt's lost labyrinth is one of those cases where history and legend intertwine. There are stories, there are ancient maps, there are clues, but there is no certainty, only an image in the minds of the ancients and an open question that continues to float in the desert air. Did the largest labyrinth ever built really exist? And if so, why did it disappear without a trace? In the arid and majestic lands of the southwestern United States, where the canyons of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico now stretch out, a complex and mysterious civilization flourished for centuries, the Anasazi, also known as the Ancient Pueblo. Between the 9th and 11th centuries, they built impressive cities carved into cliffs, networks of roads, irrigation canals, and ceremonial structures that still amaze today with their precision and scale. But around the year 1300, something happened. The great cities were abandoned, the houses were left empty, the fires went out, and the Anasazi disappeared from history without a clear explanation. The Anasazi were not a primitive culture. They had brilliantly adapted to a harsh and dry environment. They built multi-story dwellings in the cliffs, known as cliff dwellings, such as those still visible at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. These structures were not only functional, but also highly symbolic, with spaces set aside for rituals such as underground kivas, where religious ceremonies were held. They also traded with distant regions from Mexico to California and possessed advanced astronomical knowledge. However, toward the end of the 11th century, their cities were abandoned one after another. There are no clear signs of war or mass destruction. The archaeological remains show no traces of fires or battles that would explain an invasion. Only a gradual but total exodus, as if they had decided to leave collectively without leaving a written explanation. The big question is why? One of the most widely accepted theories is climate change. During that period, there was a long drought that lasted several decades. Agriculture became unsustainable. Crops failed, and water sources dried up. In such a fragile environment, that could have been enough to force them to migrate. But some researchers believe it was not just the climate. They also point to internal conflicts, struggles over resources, social tensions, or religious crises. There are also disturbing signs. In some places, human remains have been found with marks suggesting episodes of extreme violence or even ritual cannibalism. This has led to the belief that in recent years, environmental and social pressures may have triggered a profound collapse of social organization. Others believe that they did not disappear as such, but rather transformed, and that their descendants still live today among native peoples, such as the Opi, the Zuni, and the Pueblo peoples, who maintain traditions, legends, and practices that may have originated with those ancient inhabitants. But the enigma remains unsolved because they never left any written records and their departure was not documented. They left behind only empty cities carved into the rock like silent ghosts of a past that we have not yet fully deciphered. The disappearance of the Anasazi is one of the great mysteries of North America, a story that lives on in the stones, but which no one has been able to tell in its entirety. In the heart of Egypt, among ancient temples and reliefs carved with astonishing precision, lies one of the most enigmatic artifacts of the ancient world, the Dendera zodiac. This mysterious star map was discovered on the ceiling of a chapel in the Temple of Ater in the ancient city of Dendera, and since its discovery has puzzled historians, astronomers, and archaeologists alike. What makes it so special is not only its beauty or its age, but the fact that it shows constellations and celestial symbols that seem to go far beyond the astronomical knowledge attributed to ancient Egypt. Even today, its true meanings remain a subject of debate and speculation. The Temple of Ater in Dendera is one of the best preserved structures from the Greco-Roman period in Egypt, and the zodiac in question was carved into an elevated chapel that was probably used for celestial rituals. It is estimated to have been created during the Ptolemaic period, approximately in the 1st century BC, although some suggest that it may have been a copy of a much older model, preserved and adapted over generations. The circular relief shows a view of the sky with recognizable constellations, zodiacal signs, and an organization that mixes traditional Egyptian elements with Greek, Mesopotamian, and possibly even more remote influences. At first glance, the Dendra zodiac is a large disk carved in stone measuring over 2 m in diameter. It depicts human figures, animals, and objects that, upon closer study, have been associated with the 12 signs of the zodiac we know today: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Piscis. This in itself is surprising because although ancient Egypt had a strong relationship with the stars, its astrology was very different from that developed in Babylon and Greece. However, this disk reveals an unexpected synthesis of knowledge. Egyptian gods coexist with Greek zodiac symbols in the same celestial narrative. Why are these traditions mixed together? What was the purpose of this zodiac? Some scholars believe that it served as an astronomical tool, a celestial calendar for calculating the positions of planets and stars. Others claim that it had a purely ritual function and was used in religious ceremonies related to rebirth, death, and eternity. But there are those who think it is something more, a capsule of ancestral knowledge that hides coded information about cosmic cycles and the origins of time. One of the strangest elements of the zodiac is the presence of constellations that were supposedly unknown to the Egyptians. There are clear representations of modern zodiac signs, but also star clusters such as the Big Dipper, Orion, and other celestial bodies that would imply advanced knowledge of the sky. In addition, there are figures that appear to represent planets in specific positions, which has led some researchers to propose that the Dendra zodiac not only shows the sky, but also points to a precise moment in time. This is where one of the most controversial theories comes in, the hypothesis that the zodiac represents a specific date, possibly an astronomical event of great importance. Some astronomers have attempted to calculate when the planetary positions depicted in the relief would coincide with the celestial reality, and the results vary from dates in the century before Christ to the year 400 BC, depending on the interpretation. Other researchers, especially those inclined toward alternative or esoteric theories, have suggested that the zodiac could be proof that astronomical knowledge existed long before what we officially recognize. There are even those who link it to lost civilizations or knowledge inherited from a forgotten prehistoric era. For centuries, the Dendra zodiac remained in Egypt, but in the 19th century, it was removed from its site by French explorers and transferred to the Louvre Museum in Paris, where it is currently located. This act sparked protests at the time, and even today some Egyptians are calling for its return as part of their cultural heritage. Since its arrival in Europe, it has been the subject of fascination and study. Astronomers have scanned it, historians have compared its symbols to those of other cultures, and mystics have interpreted it as a kind of cosmic mandala revealing the connection between heaven and earth. But what is most unsettling is that despite all the efforts, there is still no consensus on its real meaning. There are too many layers, too many overlapping symbols, too many mixed elements. It is as if the zodiac was designed to be understood only by initiates, as if it were a secret language carved in stone. Some figures seem to have double or triple meanings. Others do not clearly fit into any known system. Even the positions of the stars on the disk do not follow a natural order, but rather an internal logic that still eludes us. A common question is, why did they go to such lengths to create such a complex, precise piece and carve it high up in a sacred chapel? What were they trying to communicate? Who was the message intended for? It may not have been a simple map of the sky, but a visual account of how they understood the universe. Perhaps it was a way of recording wisdom that they knew could be lost, Or perhaps it was a tool for connecting with the gods, with cosmic cycles, with the order of the world. A reminder that time is not linear, but circular, that everything is connected. The fascinating thing about the Dendera zodiac is that the more you study it, the more questions it raises. There is no single way to read it. Each interpretation opens up new possibilities, making it one of the greatest mysteries of ancient Egypt. An object that cannot be reduced to a simple explanation. It defies modern logic, seeming to whisper something we are not yet ready to fully understand. Perhaps one day someone will succeed in deciphering it completely. Perhaps there is a key, an astronomical connection yet to be discovered, or a text hidden elsewhere that will shed light on its function. Or perhaps we will never know. And that silence, that ambiguity, is precisely what makes it so powerful. Because in a world full of explanations, mystery still has a place. And the Dendera zodiac continues to stare back at us from the past like a map to the unknown. Beneath the surface of Europe, hidden from plain sight, lies an enigma that has challenged archaeologists and explorers for decades: the megalithic tunnels. This is an underground network of thousands of kilometers carved into the rock that connects distant regions to each other. From Scotland to Turkey, from Germany to Spain, narrow, straight passages have been discovered, carved with pinpoint precision, which seem to form part of an ancient and gigantic communication system. The mystery lies in how they were built without modern tools. Why were they made with such effort? And for what purpose? Because to this day, their purpose remains a complete mystery. The first tunnels were found over a century ago in Bavaria, Germany. At first, they were thought to be local structures, shelters, or escape tunnels. But over the years, archaeologists in Austria, Hungary, France, and then in even more distant regions began to find very similar underground constructions, narrow, perfectly aligned, made of solid rock with concealed entrances and, in some cases, accompanied by the remains of megalithic settlements. The word megalithic refers to the enormous stones used in structures such as Stonehenge, dolmens, or menhirs, that is, prehistoric cultures that without iron, wheels, or writing managed to move and position stones weighing tens of tons. But what many people don't know is that beneath these monuments, there are often tunnels. And these tunnels are not just simple holes. They follow patterns, have directions, controlled turns, and reinforced sections. In some cases, they form interconnected networks that defy all logic for their time. One of the most puzzling aspects is their extent. Some researchers believe that in ancient times there were underground routes that could connect regions separated by hundreds of kilometers. Fragmentary evidence indicates that from Scotland to the Mediterranean, there were similar entrances and passages. These are not continuous tunnels in a straight line, but a network of corridors, chambers, and access points that seem to be part of a larger system. A transportation system, shelters, or tunnels. No one knows for sure. The construction of these tunnels is itself a technical mystery. Today, drilling a tunnel requires heavy machinery, planning, and knowledge of geology. But these tunnels were carved out thousands of years ago, many in the Stone Age. Most are barely wide enough for a person to pass through. Some extend for dozens of meters without interruption. They are made of hard rock, sometimes volcanic, sometimes limestone, which raises a logical question. How do they build them? The tools believed to have been available to these civilizations were stone, wood, and bone, with no hard metals, no explosives, no artificial lighting, and no mops. How much time must they have spent digging such long tunnels with such precision? Some believe that entire generations participated in their creation as part of some ritual or ancestral mandate. Others suggest that there was a lost technique, a forgotten knowledge that allowed them to dig more efficiently. Beyond the technique, the big question is what for? Why invest years, perhaps centuries, in digging tunnels underground with no apparent immediate use? One of the most common theories is that they were secure connection routes. In times of war or migration, these passages would allow people to move between villages or regions without exposing themselves on the surface. Another possibility is that they were sacred routes used in secret rituals or initiation ceremonies. The darkness, isolation, and feeling of entering the belly of the earth all suggest a deep symbolic value. It has also been suggested that they functioned as underground storage areas, places to keep food, water, valuable objects, or even corpses. But none of these explanations quite fits. Many of the tunnels are too narrow to carry loads. They do not have enough ventilation to keep fires or lamps burning for long. In many cases, they lead nowhere. They extend a few meters, and end in a smooth wall. There are no large chambers or signs of daily activity, as if they were created for a purpose that was neither practical nor obvious. Another curious detail is the repetition of the architectural pattern. Similar tunnels have been found in regions that had no apparent contact with each other. In Scotland, for example, there are underground tunnels from the Neolithic period called souterrains, with dimensions and shapes almost identical to those found in Turkey or Austria. How is it possible that cultures separated by thousands of kilometers built such similar structures without having had any direct relationship? This has led some researchers to propose the existence of a common mother culture prior to known civilizations that would have transmitted this knowledge throughout the continent. There are even those who go further. Some alternative authors have suggested that these tunnels are part of an energy network aligned with specific points on Earth known as ley lines. Others link them to legends about underground civilizations, such as Agartha or the intraterrestrial peoples mentioned in ancient mythologies. Although these theories are not accepted by official science, they show how deep the mystery is and how many interpretations have emerged to try to make sense of it. There are also versions that relate these tunnels to astronomical observations that may not have been paths, but underground calendars, passages that guided rituals linked to the solstice, the equinox, or lunar phases. In some cases, the entrances have been found to be aligned with specific points in the sky on certain dates of the year. If this is intentional, then the tunnel was not simply a passageway, but a temple hidden in the earth. However, not all tunnels have been studied. Many are sealed. Others are dangerous to explore due to their fragility or because they are on private property, and others simply have not yet been discovered. Modern ground scanning techniques, such as ground-penetrating radar, are slowly revealing new sections, but each discovery raises more questions than answers. Why are so many tunnels intentionally buried? Why do some appear to have been hidden with stones or earth placed there manually? Who did they want to protect or hide? Is it possible that some of this knowledge has been deliberately erased from history? One of the most intriguing theories is that these tunnels represent an ancient form of memory, that they were not meant for walking, but for remembering. Every meter excavated, every turn, every obstacle was part of a narrative lived by generations, a path of initiation, where, passing through darkness, isolation, and silence, one was symbolically reborn, not a simple path, but a sacred experience. And perhaps that is why they continue to baffle us, because they were not built for a practical purpose like modern tunnels, but with a spiritual, symbolic, or even psychological logic that we have lost over time. In an age where everything is measured by its usefulness, these passages confront us with a different idea, that there are things that are built not to be used, but to be experienced. And perhaps that is why they resist simple explanations. The megalithic tunnels of Europe are a silent reminder that history is full of gaps, that for every answer we find there are hundreds of questions waiting beneath the surface, and that deep within the earth there are still secrets from a past we have not yet managed to understand. Invisible paths that connected cultures, beliefs, and worlds that we are only beginning to glimpse. In the early morning of February 25th, 1942, just a few months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the city of Los Angeles witnessed an event as strange as it was disturbing. Air raid sirens began to sound around 2:25 in the morning. Minutes later, searchlights lit up the sky. Anti-aircraft batteries began firing relentlessly, and for almost an hour, the Californian sky was the scene of what many thought was an invasion. However, at dawn, No enemy aircraft were found, nor were there any aircraft wreckage, bodies, or clear signs that had triggered such an intense military response. That episode went down in history with a name as cinematic as it is enigmatic: the Battle of Los Angeles. It all began with the paranoia that was sweeping the United States at the time. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy had attacked the naval base at Pearl Harbor, and the country had just entered World War II. It was feared that the West Coast would be the next target. In fact, just one day before the incident in Los Angeles, a Japanese submarine had attacked an oil refinery off the coast of Santa Barbara, further fueling fears of an imminent attack. In that tense and uncertain context, any sign in the sky could be interpreted as a threat. At 2:15 a.m. on February 25th, radar detected an object flying more than 190 kilometers off the coast. 10 minutes later, the air raid sirens went off and the entire city was plunged into darkness by government order. At 3:16 a.m., anti-aircraft fire began. More than 100 shells were fired at an object that, according to numerous witnesses, was floating slowly over the city. Some said it looked like a dirigible, others that it was a formation of aircraft, but the most disturbing thing was that despite the continuous firing, the object did not fall, did not explode, but simply continued on its way and disappeared. Newspapers of the time, such as the Los Angeles Times, published shocking images the following day. One of them showed a figure in the sky, illuminated by searchlights, while anti-aircraft guns surrounded it with explosions. That image became iconic and has been analyzed ad nauseum by enthusiasts, researchers, and theorists of the unexplained. What was that object? Why wasn't it shot down? Did it really exist, or was it a collective illusion fueled by fear? The U.S. government offered several explanations, but none were entirely convincing. At first, it was said that it was probably a false alarm caused by nervous gunners who mistook a weather balloon for an enemy aircraft. However, many of the soldiers and officers present claimed to have seen a solid metal object moving with direction and constant speed. Other reports spoke of multiple lights in the sky, moving in formation. The most curious thing is that after an hour of fire, the supposed enemy did not counterattack. There were no explosions beyond those caused by the anti-aircraft projectiles themselves. Nothing was found on the ground except shrapnel. Even so, the chaos caused material damage, minor fires, and sadly the death of at least 5 people, 3 from accidents related to the panic and 2 from heart attacks caused by the fright. In the days that followed, Navy Secretary Frank Nooks tried to calm the population by saying that it had all been a false alarm, but not everyone was convinced. General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff, wrote a secret memo suggesting that there had been more than one aircraft involved in the event, which sparked even more theories. Over the years, the Battle of Los Angeles became the subject of speculation. In the 1950s and 1960s, with the growing popularity of flying saucers and UFO sightings, many began to see the incident in a different light. According to some extraterrestrial enthusiasts, what flew over Los Angeles that night was not a plane or a balloon, but a spacecraft of unknown origin. The fact that it withstood more than 1,000 projectiles without suffering damage, that it did not emit any recognizable sound, and that it disappeared without a trace fueled the idea that it was not human technology. Others have suggested that it may have been an experimental prototype, either American or even German-Japanese, tested in secret and mistaken for a real attack. However, no nation has claimed responsibility for the flight, and no conclusive evidence has been found that it was a known aircraft. Most puzzling is that in the midst of World War II, in one of the most powerful countries in the world with active air defenses and thousands of witnesses, no one could clearly explain what really happened. Heavy weapons were fired, cities were closed, emergency protocols were activated, and yet the incident remained unsolved. Over the decades, the Battle of Los Angeles has been mentioned in books, documentaries, films, and even conspiracy theories. Some claim that the government knows more than it admits, and that what happened that night was deliberately covered up to prevent panic. Others believe it was simply an episode of mass hysteria amplified by the fear of war. But there is something in the testimonies, in the images of the time, in the firmness with which many soldiers declare that they had seen something real that prevents the case from being closed definitively. To this day, there is no official explanation that answers all the questions. What object withstood hours of fire without being hit? Why were no remains found? Was it human error or an unknown presence? What was behind the government's subsequent silence? The Battle of the Angels was not a battle in the traditional sense. There was no exchange of fire between two sides. There were no enemies captured or planes shot down. Just a city firing into the sky, trying to defend itself from something that was never identified. And that is precisely what makes it so disturbing. At a time dominated by war, mistrust, and fear of attack, something appeared in the sky and triggered a massive response. But that something left no clues. It did not behave like an enemy, it did not attack, it just stood there watching perhaps, and then it left. More than 80 years later, the incident remains unsolved. Theories abound, explanations contradict each other, official documents clarify nothing. And so the Battle of the Angels remains one of the great mysteries of modern history. A real, documented episode that defies all logic. A night when the sky became the scene of the inexplicable. A silent warning that there are still things that are completely beyond our understanding. In the heart of West Africa, in the arid lands of Mali, lives an ancient tribe known as the Dogon. For centuries, they have inhabited the Bandi-Agra region, building villages on cliffs, cultivating the land, and preserving a deeply spiritual worldview. But what makes the Dogon truly enigmatic is not just their culture or art, but an astronomical knowledge that has baffled scientists and anthropologists for decades. According to multiple studies, the Dogon knew of the existence of a star invisible to the naked eye, Sirius B, and knew details of its orbit and density with a precision that, according to modern science, would only be possible using advanced telescopes. How did they know? Where did this information come from? The mystery began to take shape in the 1930s, when French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and German Dieterlen spent long periods living with the Dogon, learning their language, participating in their rituals, and recording their myths. During their research, they discovered that the Dogon had a complex cosmological system centered on the star Sirius, which they called Sagittalo. What is surprising is that not only did they know that Sirius was a bright star visible to the naked eye from Earth, but they also claimed that it had an invisible companion star, extremely heavy and very small, which orbited around it in a cycle of approximately 50 years. This star, according to the Dogon, was so dense that no one could lift it. This detail puzzled researchers because it fit perfectly with what modern astronomers had discovered in 1862, but had not fully confirmed until the 1920s that Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, has a white dwarf companion called Sirius B, invisible to the human eye. Detectable only with powerful telescopes. Sirius B is tiny, but extremely massive and dense, and its orbit around Sirius lasts about 50 years, exactly as described by the Dogon. But there was more. According to Grohl, the Dogon also knew that Sirius B's orbit was not circular but elliptical, and they knew that this star rotated on its own axis. In addition, they spoke of other stars in the Sirius system and described how this system was related to the origin of life. According to their mythology, beings called Namo, who came from Sirius, descended to Earth long ago in a ship as bright as fire. These beings were aquatic with an amphibious form and taught humans many things: agriculture, language, and the laws of the universe. Most disturbing of all is that these stories, passed down orally for generations, seem to contain scientific details that could not have been observed without modern instruments. How could the Dogon know about the existence of an invisible star? How could they know its mass, density, type, and orbit? Some skeptics have suggested that the Dogon could have obtained this information indirectly, perhaps through contact with Western astronomers before anthropologists arrived. But records show that the Dogon were already talking about Sirius B and the NMO long before any documented contact with Europeans who had that level of scientific knowledge. Other hypotheses go even further. Some propose that the Dogon inherited astronomical knowledge from a lost civilization that predates even Egypt or Mesopotamia. There are those who link their wisdom to advanced cultures of the past that may have had contact with them in ancient times or even with visitors from other worlds. This latter idea, although rejected by academic science, has gained strength among authors of alternative theories who see the Dogon as further proof that humans have been in contact with higher intelligences at some point in their history. The Dogon also knew about Saturn's rings, Jupiter's moons, and spoke of a spiral galaxy that could be related to the Milky Way. In addition, their calendar is extremely accurate, based not only on the solar cycle, but also on more complex cycles related to celestial phenomena. For a culture without writing or technology, these levels of knowledge are puzzling. During the SII ceremony, which is held every 60 years and is one of the most important religious festivals of the Dogon, rituals linked to the movement of Sirius are performed. This ceremony includes dances, masks, songs, and symbols representing the cosmos, the Namo, and the balance of the universe. The entire Dogon spiritual system is intertwined with astronomy, as if their religion and science were one and the same. This intertwining has led some researchers to wonder whether the Dogon's knowledge comes from deep spiritual intuition rather than direct observation. Is it possible that a culture can access astronomical truths through its symbolic worldview without the need for telescopes? Or is there a deeper story that we have yet to discover? In recent decades, other anthropologists have questioned Griol's original findings. Some argue that the data was misinterpreted or even exaggerated, that perhaps the Dogon adapted their myths after hearing bits of scientific information from the anthropologists themselves. But this explanation does not fit entirely either, as the details they offer were not generalities, but specific descriptions that in some cases were not even public knowledge at the time. The mystery of the Dogon and Sirius B remains unsolved, and like all good mysteries, it offers no easy answers. What it has done is remind us that human history is full of gray areas, of moments when knowledge seems to have emerged from nowhere, as if a spark of ancient wisdom had traveled through time. Perhaps the Dogon are the heirs to an ancestral memory that we have forgotten. Perhaps their knowledge does not come from the sky, but from a past that we do not yet fully understand. Or perhaps their story is a reminder that the universe is more complex, more interconnected, and deeper than our modern logic can comprehend. What is clear is that a small tribe in Africa, without technology, without telescopes, without contact with universities or observatories, spoke of an invisible star and its characteristics long before the world knew it existed. And that alone deserves to be remembered. Because in the silence of the desert, among cliffs and mud villages, the Dogon continue to look up at the sky and repeat stories that may contain truths we are only beginning to rediscover. In the arid desert of southern Peru, in a vast expanse of land that seems endless under the scorching sun, lies one of the greatest enigmas of world archaeology, the Nazca Lines. These giant figures traced on the earth, which can only be fully appreciated from the air, represent animals, geometric shapes, and human or humanoid beings. Some are over 300 meters long and so precise that even today it is difficult to replicate them accurately without the use of aerial technology. But among all the shapes that stretch across the plain, there is one that has generated particular debate and fascination, the figure known as the Nazca astronaut. This figure, also known as the Owl Man or simply the helmeted being, depicts a character with a large head, prominent eyes, and a posture reminiscent of someone waving. Unlike the other figures, which are drawn flat on the ground, this one is carved into the side of a hill. It is visible from a certain height, but not from the ground itself. Its strange appearance, unusual proportions, and mysterious location have fueled one of the most controversial theories of the 20th century, that of ancient astronauts. What if ancient peoples were not only inspired by imaginary gods, but actually saw beings from other planets? And if the Nazca figures, especially the astronaut, are representations of these visitors, the hypothesis is not new. It was popularized by Eric Bondeniken in the 1960s in his book Recuerdos del Futuro, Memories of the Future, where he proposed that many ancient cultures around the world received visits from extraterrestrial civilizations that were interpreted as gods due to their advanced technology. According to this theory, the gods did not descend from the sky in a metaphorical sense, but literally in ships, wearing suits, using energy and knowledge that humans of the time could not understand. Already, with its enormous geoglyphs visible only from the air, it seems a particularly conducive place for that idea, because someone would make giant drawings that can only be seen from above at a time, when flying was not possible. How did they draw such straight lines, smooth curves, and proportional shapes without rising? Even a meter? And why make these figures in such an inhospitable area with no apparent value or practical use? Proponents of the astronaut gods theory propose that the lines are landing strips, signals for visitors from the sky, or even rituals directed at these celestial beings. According to this logic, the figure of the astronaut would be a direct representation of one of these visitors, a creature with a round helmet, large black eyes, and a humanoid body. Some have even pointed out that his raised arm seems to be a sign of communication, as if he were waving to those observing him from above. In addition, there are other figures that fuel this interpretation. Some lines seem to form circuits or trajectories, others cross mountains with laser precision, and others are deeply marked into the ground, their resistance to the passage of time astonishing. Even today, after centuries of exposure to wind and sun, the lines are still there, almost intact. Was it simple knowledge of the environment or the use of advanced technology? The Nazca culture that flourished between the centuries AD left few written records. We have no texts explaining exactly what the lines symbolized or how they were made. What we do know is that they were keen observers of the sky who had a deep connection with astronomy, water, and agriculture. The lines may have had ritual functions related to invoking rain, solar cycles, or sacred cosmology. But the truth is that to this day, there is no unanimous explanation. Traditional archaeologists propose that the lines were ceremonial paths and that the figures were part of a religious cult. Some lines point to points on the horizon where the sun or moon align on key dates, such as the solstices. However, these explanations, while possible, do not fully explain the magnitude and complexity of the layout. The figure of the astronaut, in particular, breaks with the patterns. It is not an animal. It is not a geometric figure. It is not drawn flat, but in relief. Its design does not seem to fit the traditional Nazca style. And above all, its face is more reminiscent of a mask or helmet than a human face. Could this be a modern misinterpretation? Or is it possible that the Nazca people wanted to represent something they actually saw? Ancient cultures did not just live looking at the earth. Many of them had their eyes fixed on the sky. They believed that their gods came from the stars, that the constellations had power, and that the movements of the stars influenced human destiny. In America, Asia, Africa, and Europe, worship of the heavens was universal. And if at some point in the past, that sky really did bring something else. The Dogon people of Africa spoke of Sirius B before it was discovered. The Sumerians depicted gods wearing helmets and suits. In ancient India, there was talk of flying chariots called Bimanas. In Mesoamerica, the gods descended from the sky, enveloped in fire. And in Peru, in the middle of the desert, someone drew on the earth what appears to be a figure that resembles no known animal or common human figure. Skeptics argue that all this is fantasy, that the Nazca astronaut is simply a stylized figure, like many others in ancient art. That seeing helmets, black eyes, and greetings is a modern projection influenced by science fiction, that there is no real evidence of extraterrestrials. But even if we put aside the alien theory, the mystery remains. How could a culture without writing, without wheels, without metal tools, create such complex and precise figures? How did they know where to start and where to end a line that they could not see in its entirety from the ground? What technology, method, or knowledge did they apply? Why devote so many resources to something that was not visible from their own perspective? And if we accept the possibility of celestial visitors, not necessarily from other planets, but from some higher intelligence or lost knowledge, then the Nazca lines could be more than just art. They could be messages, signals, attempts at contact, or even memories of an encounter. The truth is that to this day, no one has been able to answer all the questions. The Nazca lines continue to defy our understanding, and the figure of the astronaut continues to wave from the hillside, as if waiting for someone to one day understand its true meaning. We may never know for sure what the Nazca people saw, what they thought, or what they wanted to communicate, but what they left behind cannot be ignored. It is a gigantic, silent, and deeply enigmatic work, a mark that speaks without words and continues to look up at the sky, just like us. At the bottom of the Aegean Sea, near the small Greek island of Antikythera, a group of divers found the remains of an ancient Roman shipwreck in 1901. Among statues, amphorae, bronze, and marble pieces, an object emerged that at first did not seem like much, a corroded mass of metal and wood. No one at the time imagined that this dusty fragment would become one of the most amazing discoveries in modern archaeology. After years of study, the artifact revealed itself to be an incredibly precise machine, a kind of analog computer built more than 2,000 years ago, known today as the Antikythera mechanism. This mechanism challenges what we thought we knew about ancient technology. It is a complex network of gears, cogwheels, and scales that was used, among other things, to predict astronomical positions, lunar phases, eclipses, and sporting events such as the Olympic Games. Most puzzling is that its design and technical level would not be matched again until more than 1,000 years later, in the midst of the scientific revolution. How is it possible that an ancient civilization developed a machine with such mechanical precision? Who built it? How? And why was this knowledge lost for so long? The mechanism was found more than 40 m deep among the remains of a ship believed to have sunk around 60 BC, but the object itself is much older. The most recent studies estimate that it was built around 150 BC somewhere in Hellenistic Greece. Its original structure was contained in a wooden box approximately the size of a shoebox and had at least 30 bronze gears, although some experts believe that it may have originally had more than 70. At first glance, it looked like a mass of rusted metal, but analysis using X-rays and other modern techniques revealed the intricate system hidden inside. The gears were carefully designed with triangular teeth, assembled in such a way that they could transmit precise rotary movements. Turning a crank activated different wheels that in turn moved discs and pointers, indicating the position of the sun, the moon, and probably also the 5 planets known in ancient times: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. One of the wheels even adjusted the speed of the moon according to Kepler's second law, centuries before Kepler was born. This demonstrates not only technical skill, but also extraordinarily advanced astronomical knowledge. One of the most impressive aspects of the mechanism is that it includes a function for predicting solar and lunar eclipses. Using a gear system connected to the so-called Saros cycle, an 18-year pattern already known to the Babylonians, the device could predict when and where an eclipse would occur. Using a gear system connected to the so-called Saros cycle, an 18-year pattern already known to the Babylonians, the device could anticipate when and where an eclipse would occur. It also displayed the months of the Greek calendar and followed the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same dates of the year. This made it possible to synchronize the lunar calendar with the solar calendar, which was essential for the religious and civil organization of the time. But the mechanism was not limited to astronomical calculations. One of its inscriptions indicated the dates of important sporting competitions, including the Olympic Games. It was, therefore, a multifunctional calendar capable of integrating celestial events with human festivities, that is, an ancient computer designed not only to observe the sky, but also to organize life on Earth. The complexity of this machine led many to question its authenticity at first. How could the ancient Greeks have built something so advanced? For years, it was thought to be a fake or a modern object mistaken for an ancient one. However, all archaeological, chemical, and contextual analyses have confirmed its antiquity. There is no doubt that the Antikythera mechanism is real and ancient. This raises an inevitable question. How is it that we have no other examples of similar technology from antiquity? Why did something so advanced appear only once and then disappear for centuries? One possible answer is that this technology did exist, but it was extremely rare and was lost over time. The mechanism may have been a one-off or part of a limited series built by a small group of scholars. It has been suggested that it may have been the work of a workshop in Rhodes where mathematicians and engineers who were heirs to the legacy of Archimedes worked. In fact, some believe that Archimedes himself or his disciples may have been involved in its design. Another possibility is that many similar devices existed but did not survive. Bronze was a valuable material that was often recycled. Invasions, fires, and centuries of neglect may have destroyed other mechanisms. In addition, the wood that contained it decomposes easily. For this reason, the discovery of the antiquity mechanism is considered an archaeological miracle. Ancient texts also provide clues that Greek scholars built mechanical devices. Cicero, for example, described a sphere built by Archimedes that could reproduce the movement of celestial bodies. Poppo of Alexandria and other authors mentioned similar mechanisms, but until the Antikythera mechanism appeared, we had no material evidence that such a thing had actually existed. In recent decades, international teams of scientists have used high-resolution scanners, artificial intelligence, and digital reconstructions to try to understand and replicate the mechanism. Physically accurate models have been created. However, there are still missing pieces, functions that are not fully understood, and symbols on the disks that remain undeciphered. Despite the advances, the mechanism still holds secrets. This object has changed the way we understand the history of science. It shows that the ancient Greeks not only thought in philosophical terms, but also developed concrete, functional, and precise technology. The myth that ancient civilizations were incapable of creating complex instruments is completely debunked. On the contrary, the mechanism of Antikythera suggests that there was a loss of knowledge, a technological setback after the fall of Hellenistic Greece and the rise of the Roman Empire and later during the Middle Ages. The history of the mechanism also makes us reflect on how much knowledge may have been lost over the centuries. If a machine as advanced as this could be forgotten under the sea for 2 millennia, what else might have existed and simply disappeared? Today, the Antikythera mechanism is on display at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where it continues to amaze those who see it. It is a small, silent object, corroded by time, but behind its humble appearance lies a feat of human ingenuity, a window into a past when science and mechanics flourished in ways we still do not fully understand. It was not magic or divination, it was precise applied knowledge, incredibly ahead of its time. The Antikythera mechanism is more than a relic. It is proof that the past holds technological secrets that challenge our ideas about progress and invite us to rediscover what we once knew but forgot. In February 1959, a group of 9 young Soviet hikers disappeared in the northern Ural Mountains, in a remote region known as Kolyma, which in the Mansi language means mountain of death. What began as a hiking expedition to gain experience turned into one of the most baffling mysteries of the 20th century, the Dyatlov Pass incident. To this day, the details surrounding the tragedy remain unexplained. The strange conditions in which the bodies were found, the seemingly irrational behavior of the group, and the absence of a clear cause sparked decades of speculation, theories, conflicting official reports, and a constant feeling that something was not quite right. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student. Passionate about mountains and exploration, he was traveling with 8 companions, all students at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, experienced skiers prepared for extreme cold and the harshest conditions. The plan was to cross a mountainous area, document the trip with photographs and notes, and return in a few weeks. But they never came back. When the group failed to send any news on the agreed date, their families began to worry. On February 20th, a rescue operation was organized. Days later, on the 26th, their tent was found on a snowy hillside. It was half buried in snow, torn from the inside, as if someone had left it in a hurry. There were no signs of a struggle or external attack. The scene seemed frozen in time, and what was discovered next added to the confusion. The bodies appeared one by one, scattered in the snow, barefoot, half-naked, despite the sub-zero temperatures. 2 were next to a tree with burned hands, as if they had tried desperately to light a fire. 3 more were found between the tent and the tree, as if they had tried to return. The last 4 were found months later, buried under meters of snow in a small hollow. Those 4 had much more serious injuries, skull fractures, broken ribs, and one of them, the young Lyudmila Duvanina, had no tongue or eyes, but there were no signs of a struggle, no footprints of third parties, only their own footprints and the ice that covered everything. The autopsy revealed even stranger details. The fractures were so violent that some forensic scientists compared them to those of a car accident, but there were no external signs on the skin, as if the injuries had been caused by a massive force but without visible impact. In addition, some of the bodies showed traces of radiation on their clothing. The documentation of the case, once classified, showed multiple contradictions, delays in publication, and details that appear to have been censored or deleted. What could have happened that night in the Dyatlov Pass? The official version at the time was that the young people died from an irresistible natural force, a vague statement with no concrete content. That only increased the doubts. Since then, numerous theories have been proposed, some scientific, others more speculative, but none has been able to answer with complete certainty all the questions raised by the case. One of the most widely accepted hypotheses in recent years is that of the phenomenon known as a slab avalanche. This theory suggests that a small mass of snow suddenly slid over the tent, forcing the group to leave urgently. In the midst of the panic, the hikers fled into the forest in the middle of the night, disoriented, poorly dressed, and in temperatures that dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. According to this hypothesis, the extreme cold caused the first bodies to die of hypothermia, and the last 4 suffered injuries when they fell into a snowdrift. This explanation, although reasonable in part, is not entirely convincing. No traces of an obvious avalanche were found, and the tent was still partially standing. Another theory suggests that the hikers were victims of secret military tests. Some researchers suggest that the group may have accidentally entered a restricted area and died as a result of explosions, sonic weapons, or even chemical substances. The presence of radiation on some clothing and the apparent interest of the government in silencing certain aspects of the case fuel this idea. However, no conclusive evidence of military activity in the area at that time has been found. There are also more extreme theories. Some propose that the group was attacked by an unknown creature, ranging from yetis to even supernatural entities. Others point to atmospheric phenomena, such as Kármán infrasound, a kind of imperceptible sound wave that could induce panic, disorientation, and irrational behavior. This idea, although little known, has been studied by physicists and is considered plausible under certain conditions. And then there are hypotheses that link the case to the inexplicable, unidentified flying objects, contact with unknown entities, and mind experiments. The photographs found in the group's cameras, some blurry, others with strange lights in the sky, have served as the basis for theories related to extraterrestrials. Although these ideas lack scientific backing, they remain popular among those who believe that the truth was deliberately hidden. For decades, the Dyatlov case remained classified, It was only in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that documents began to be released. But far from clarifying what happened, the files only added to the mystery. Lack of information, missing pages, contradictory witnesses, changing versions. Everything seems to indicate that fundamental pieces of the story are still missing. The victims' families never received clear answers, only frozen bodies, cryptic documents, and the weight of the mystery. Some independent researchers have spent years reconstructing the group's steps, analyzing every photograph, every entry in the hiker's diaries, every forensic report. But the only thing that seems certain is that what happened that night was extraordinary. The Dyatlov Pass has inspired books, documentaries, films, and countless debates in forums around the world. It has been the subject of study in criminology, forensic medicine, physics, psychology, and even literature. But no one has been able to conclusively reconstruct what happened. Why would a group of experienced, well-equipped young people would abandon their tent in the middle of the night in deadly temperatures without taking adequate clothing or flashlights? What force drove them to run to their deaths? Some with broken bones, others with missing organs, others simply frozen as if time had stopped. Today, the Dyatlov Pass has become a place of pilgrimage for adventurers, curious people, and lovers of enigmas. In the middle of the cold mountains stands a monument with the names of the 9 who died. Igor Dyatlov, Finida, Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Rustem Slobodin, Alexander Kolbatov, Yuri Dorisenko, Yuri Krybonichenko, Nikolai Taboks-Brignoy, and Semyon Zolotary. 9 lives cut short by an event that science has not yet been able to fully explain. The Dyatlov Pass incident reminds us that no matter how far we advance technologically, nature and perhaps the universe still hold mysteries that are beyond our understanding. Somewhere in the cold Siberian desert, on a moonless night, something happened, something terrifying, confusing, or powerful enough to shatter the logic of a trained and united group. And until we know exactly what it was, that frozen hillside will remain a place where answers froze along with the bodies, where the wind continues to blow over an enigma that may never be completely solved. For centuries, sailors, cartographers, and explorers spoke of a mysterious island located west of Ireland. It appeared again and again on ancient maps, sometimes with the name H and Brazil, other times as Brazil, High, Breaçal, or Brazil. It was said to be shrouded in a perpetual fog that was only visible once every 7 years and disappeared as soon as anyone tried to approach it. Over time, the island disappeared from maps and faded from historical memory. But for more than 500 years, it was considered a real place, not a myth or a legend, but a specific island, recorded and awaited by those who believed that there was land beyond the horizon. Thus was born the mystery of the ghost island of H and Brazil. The first documented mention of H Brazil appears on 14th century maps, especially on Andrea Bianco's Venetian map of 1436, where the island is shown west of Ireland. In medieval and Renaissance portolan maps, its location varies slightly, but it is always found in a region of the North Atlantic Ocean, solitary, far from any other known point. Irish sailors spoke of it as a mythical island inhabited by wise men, gods, or enlightened beings. Others claimed it was an earthly paradise, a city of gold, a land where rivers were pure, fruit trees grew in abundance, and suffering did not exist. Hi, Brazil should not be confused with Brazil, the South American country. Although they share the same name, their origins are completely different. The name Brazil, in the case of the island, possibly comes from the Celtic term Breaçal, which was the name of a god in the ancient Irish world, linked to invisible kingdoms, unreachable horizons, and ancestral wisdom. In Irish tradition, High and Brazil were magical lands that were only revealed to those who were spiritually prepared or those destined to see them. For centuries, many sailors tried to find it. In 1480, an expedition was sent from Bristol, England, with the intention of locating the mysterious island. It was not the only one. In 1497, John Cabot, an explorer in the service of the English crown, set off on his famous journey westward, which would lead him to discover parts of North America. It has been suggested that one of his objectives was to find Brazil. Even centuries later, in the 1600s and 1700s, some claim to have seen it from the west coast of Ireland as a shadow on the horizon, a land that appeared and disappeared like an optical illusion impossible to catch. One of the strangest accounts comes from 1674, when a captain named Ion Nisbeth claimed to have seen the island during a journey from France to Ireland. According to his story, he and his crew landed there, explored its interior, and found a wise old man who offered them knowledge about the world, predictions of the future, and objects of great value. Later, another captain, Alexander Johnson, repeated the testimony, assuring that the island was real, that he had been there, and that it was inhabited by intelligent and hospitable people. These accounts were published and circulated throughout Europe, fueling the belief that Brazil was not a fable, but a physical reality. Some even thought that it contained an ancient civilization predating known humanity, or that it was a remnant of Atlantis, the lost city described by Plato. But over time, something changed. As cartography advanced and the Atlantic Ocean was explored and documented with greater precision, Brazil began to disappear from maps. By the 17th century, it was considered a ghost island, and by the 20th century, simply a legend. The science of the time classified it as a cartographic error resulting from imagination, misinterpretation of fog banks, cloud shadows, or optical illusions caused by atmospheric phenomena. One such phenomenon is the mirage known as Fata Morgana, where the reflection of the sky or distant coastlines can be projected onto the horizon as if it were a landmass. However, some modern researchers have proposed other possibilities. It has been suggested, for example, that the island may have actually existed and then disappeared due to natural causes. A volcanic uprising, a platform of land that emerged and was then submerged by geological or climatic changes. There's also been speculation that Brazil was confused with real islands that appear and disappear depending on the sea level or tides, as is the case with certain underwater rock formations. Another more intriguing possibility is that it was a real place, but not accessible by physical means. In many ancient traditions, especially in Celtic cultures, there's stories about invisible lands, islands beyond the grave, parallel realms that coexist with ours but can only be perceived at specific times or by people with special sensitivity. Fog, night, certain equinoxes or rituals are said to be portals to these worlds. In this sense, Brazil would not be a land that disappeared, but a land that was never entirely ours. The island also appears in modern esoteric contexts. Some occult circles have claimed that Brazil is a center of spiritual energy, one of the nodes of the planet, where invisible forces converge and influence human consciousness. Others link it to beings from other dimensions or guardians of lost knowledge. There are even those who claim that in regressive hypnosis sessions or deep meditations, they have visited the island in dreams or visions. The most fascinating thing about this mystery is how a non-existent island can have such an influence on the collective imagination. For centuries, Brazil represented the hope of a perfect land, a place of revelation and wisdom. It was a kind of hidden utopia, a promise that beyond the known world there was something else, something pure, ancient, mysterious. And that idea has enormous power because it connects with a deep human need to believe that there are secrets to be discovered, that not everything is explained, that the invisible can be real. Modern cartography no longer includes in Brazil. Satellites do not show any land at that point in the ocean, but that has not prevented the mystery from surviving. In books, songs, movies, and games, the island lives on. Some explorers of alternative thinking continue to search for it, not with maps, but with questions. What if it ever existed? What if it still exists, but cannot be reached by conventional means? What if Brazil is not a physical place, but a state of consciousness? On the west coast of Ireland, on very clear nights, some claim to have seen a shadow on the horizon, a silhouette that appears and disappears. Perhaps it is a mirage, or perhaps it is just the old island showing itself again. A reminder that maps do not always have all the answers, and that the Earth, however explored it may seem, still holds corners that escape logic and reason. Brazil is not just a ghost island. It is a symbol of what we do not yet understand, of what lies beyond the horizon. In the early morning of June 30th, 1908, a gigantic explosion shook the remote region of Tunguska in central Siberia. In a matter of seconds, more than 2,000 square kilometers of forest were destroyed. Trees were knocked down as if an invisible wave had crushed them from the sky. The sky lit up with a bluish glow. Tremors were felt in several cities thousands of kilometers away, and for days the dust in the atmosphere caused nights so bright that people could read without lamps. But when scientists managed to reach the site years later, due to the inaccessibility of the area, they did not find what they expected. There was no crater. There were no meteorite fragments, no clear trace of the object that caused such devastation. Thus was born one of the greatest natural mysteries of the 20th century, the Tunguska event. The affected region is located near the Podkamenia-Tunguska River, in an inhospitable and virtually unpopulated area. In 1908, there was no infrastructure to quickly reach the impact site. What was known came from witnesses living hundreds of kilometers away. Siberian shepherds, hunters, traders, and settlers described a terrifying phenomenon. A fireball crossing the sky, a deafening explosion, shock waves that knocked people down, broke windows, and even shook houses in places like Irkutsk, more than 900 kilometers from the epicenter. A witness in a village 60 kilometers from the site described it as follows. The sky split in two and burned above the forest. There was an explosion that shook the earth and threw people to the ground. The heat was so intense that I felt my shirt burning. And yet, amid all this destruction, there were no confirmed direct victims. No cities were hit by the impact due to the remoteness of the location. Many communities did not even know what had happened. It was not until 1927, almost 20 years later, that a scientific expedition led by Leonid Kulik managed to reach the heart of the devastated area. What they found was baffling. More than 80 million trees have been felled, all oriented radially, as if something had exploded in the air above the forest. In the center of this destruction, however, the trees remained standing. Although charred and branchless, it looked as if a shock wave had passed over them. But there was no crater, no rocks, no metal fragments, no obvious traces of a celestial body. The initial theory was that a meteorite or comet had exploded in the air before hitting the ground, releasing its energy several kilometers above the surface. This hypothesis would explain the lack of a crater and the distribution of the damage. The problem is that even in aerial explosions of meteorites, fragments are usually left behind, but none were found in Tunguska. Kulik spent years searching for debris without success. There were also no clear chemical traces of metals or obvious signs of physical impact. Over the decades, scientists have proposed different explanations. One of the most widely accepted is that it was a small asteroid or comet, composed mainly of ice or a fragile material, which exploded upon entering the atmosphere. The energy released would have been equivalent to between 10 and 15 megatons, i.e., between 500 and 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. However, this theory still does not fully explain the lack of fragments and the uniqueness of the pattern of destruction. The fascinating thing about the Tunguska case is that from the outset, it also attracted all kinds of alternative theories. Some talk about dark matter, others about tiny black holes that would have passed through the Earth. There are even more eccentric proposals, such as that of an alien spacecraft that accidentally exploded or was destroyed in the air. One of the best-known versions in speculative literature suggests that Nikola Tesla may have accidentally activated an energy weapon from New York via his famous Barton Cliff Tower, aimed at the Arctic. Although there is no evidence to support this hypothesis, it has captured the imagination of many unconventional researchers. Others suggest that the event could have been related to an extreme geophysical phenomenon, such as an underground gas explosion or a massive release of energy caused by tectonic activity. But these ideas also fail to explain the observation of the luminous object crossing the sky, nor the subsequent atmospheric effects, such as the bright skies over Europe. The truth is that the Tunguska event was unique. In recent history, there has been no other documented aerial explosion of that magnitude in such a remote area. It was not until 2013, with the Chelyabinsk meteorite, that Russia experienced another aerial explosion, although it was much smaller in comparison. The Chelyabinsk case helped validate the idea that objects from space can explode in the atmosphere and release destructive energy without touching the ground. But even there, fragments were recovered. In Tunguska, after more than a century of searching, none have been found conclusively. Despite this, the investigations continue. Modern satellites, soil analysis, chemical studies, and computer simulations have attempted to accurately reconstruct what happened that day. Some recent studies suggest that the object could have been a comet composed mainly of ice and dust, which would explain the lack of solid debris. Others suggest that it may have disintegrated in a very specific trajectory, concentrating the energy downward without leaving large traces. There is also evidence of alterations in tree growth in the decades following the event. Some trees on the perimeter grew faster, probably due to increased sunlight after the elimination of plant competition or even genetic alterations caused by the radiation released. Small traces of unusual isotopes have been found, but not in sufficient quantities to suggest a nuclear explosion. In popular culture, the Tunguska event has been a source of inspiration for novels, films, and video games. It has appeared in theories about the end of the world, in conspiracy stories, and in narratives linking it to visits from other civilizations. It is a symbol of the unexpected, of how a forgotten corner of the planet can become the scene of one of the strangest and most powerful events in modern history. The Tunguska event has also served as a warning. Today, many space agencies monitor objects close to Earth, known as NEOs, to avoid similar surprises. We know that the planet is constantly exposed to cosmic impacts, and that events like Tunguska could happen again. The difference is that we now have more technology to observe, anticipate, and perhaps intervene. More than a century later, the mystery lives on. Science has managed to reconstruct much of what happened, but questions remain unanswered. What exactly crossed the sky that early morning? What exploded with such force over the Siberian tundra? Why did it leave no clear traces? And what other similar events have gone unnoticed in regions where no one was looking? The mystery of Tunguska remains not only because of the lack of conclusive evidence, but also because it serves as a reminder that we live in a dynamic, unpredictable, and constantly changing universe. Sometimes the most perplexing questions do not come from ancient civilizations or forgotten manuscripts, but from a clearing in the forest covered with fallen trees, where the earth still remembers something that the sky once dropped without explanation. Cleopatra VII, the last queen of ancient Egypt, is one of the most fascinating and enigmatic figures in history. Her name evokes images of power, beauty, political intelligence, and tragedy. She ruled Egypt during a time of intense conflict with Rome. She was the lover of Julius Caesar, the wife of Mark Antony, and ultimately the protagonist of one of the most dramatic stories of love and death in the ancient world. However, despite her fame, the stories that have survived for centuries, and the enormous legacy she left behind, there is one fundamental detail that remains unresolved. Where is Cleopatra buried? For more than 2,000 years, the tomb of Cleopatra and Mark Antony has remained hidden. No confirmed trace of their remains has been found, nor has a tomb been identified that can be linked with certainty to them. This has made their burial one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in the world. Dozens of hypotheses have been put forward, excavations have been carried out at various sites in Egypt, and ancient texts have been studied in search of clues, but so far the whereabouts of their tombs remain a mystery. According to ancient sources, such as Plutarch After their defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt knowing that their fate was sealed. Antony committed suicide, believing that Cleopatra was already dead. She, after a failed attempt to negotiate with Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, decided to take her own life as well, probably with poison, although the most famous version speaks of an ASP bite. Plutarch wrote that Octavian allowed them to be buried together in a noble and regal manner in a tomb near the Temple of Isis. That is one of the few documented clues we have. The account mentions a place near a temple dedicated to Isis, which makes sense considering that Cleopatra strongly identified with this Egyptian goddess. Cleopatra was not only a queen, she also presented herself as a divine figure, a living incarnation of Isis. Therefore, her tomb, if it existed, would not be a simple mausoleum, but a place symbolically charged with religious and political significance. For centuries, it was assumed that the tomb must be in Alexandria, the capital of Ptolemaic Egypt and the city where Cleopatra lived most of her life. However, much of ancient Alexandria now lies underwater, submerged after earthquakes and tsunamis that struck the area in later centuries. The ruins of Cleopatra's palace, her temple, and other important structures are now under the Mediterranean Sea. Therefore, one of the most widespread theories is that her tomb could also be submerged, buried under the waters off the coast of Alexandria. However, another theory has gained attention in recent decades, namely that Cleopatra was not buried in Alexandria, but in a more symbolic location, far from the political turmoil and more closely linked to the cult of Isis. One place in particular stands out in this context: the Temple of Taposiris Magna, about 50 kilometers west of Alexandria. Taposiris Magna was an important city in Greco-Roman times and housed a large temple dedicated to Osiris, the consort of Isis. Mummies, crypts, tunnels, ritual offerings, and several indications that it was used as a sacred burial site have been found in this temple. Dominican archaeologist Catalin Martinez has led excavations at Taposiris Magna since the mid-2000s, convinced that the remains of Cleopatra and Mark Antony could be found there. Martinez has argued that Cleopatra, identifying with Isis, may have chosen to be buried in a sanctuary symbolically associated with Osiris, following the mythical logic of the union between the two gods. Excavations at Taposiris Magna have revealed several important discoveries: statues, coins bearing Cleopatra's face, busts, and even a network of underground tunnels. One of these recently discovered tunnels is more than 13 meters long and lies more than 13 meters underground. The structure appears to have been part of a ritual system, and some archaeologists believe it could lead to a high-ranking tomb. Despite the excitement surrounding these findings, no burial chamber has yet been found that can be clearly identified as Cleopatra's tomb. There are no inscriptions, mummies, or other elements that can confirm this with certainty. Some experts remain skeptical, arguing that while Taposiris Magna is fascinating from an archaeological point of view, there is no definitive evidence linking the site to the queen. Other researchers continue to believe that the tomb may be hidden beneath modern-day Alexandria in some unexcavated corner or even further south in the Nile Valley, where there were also centers of Ishiaq worship. There has also been speculation that the tomb may have been destroyed or looted in ancient times, eliminating any trace of its existence. After all, with the rise of Rome and the transformation of Egypt into a province of the empire, it would not be surprising if the new rulers had erased symbols of the old Egyptian power. But the mystery persists, fueled by Cleopatra's eternal magnetism. Beyond her beauty, which according to sources was more intellectual and charismatic than purely physical, Cleopatra was an extremely intelligent and strategic figure. She spoke several languages, was well-educated, knew Greek and Egyptian traditions, and knew how to navigate between two worlds, the Hellenistic and the Roman. Her story has been reinterpreted for centuries, from ancient texts to Shakespeare's plays, from operas to Hollywood films, but her tomb remains an unfinished chapter. The search for Cleopatra's tomb is also a search for answers. Where did one of the most powerful women in history choose to rest? How did she want to be remembered? What did she leave behind on purpose? What did she want to hide? Finding her tomb would not only solve a great archaeological enigma, but also provide a new window into the life, thoughts, and legacy of a figure who has been recounted so many times from the outside, but who still holds her final words underground. To this day, archaeologists continue to dig, historians continue to speculate, and the world continues to wait. Because in some corner of Egypt, perhaps under the sea or buried in a forgotten temple, the Queen of the Nile may still lie, the woman who defied Rome, seduced its emperors, and chose to die rather than be displayed as a trophy. Cleopatra's lost tomb is not just a piece of the past. It is a symbol of everything that history still keeps silent. In the arid state of Nevada, in the northwestern United States, there's a cave that has been the center of legends, archaeological excavations, and controversial theories for more than a century. The Overlock Cave. This place, seemingly unimportant from the outside, has become the scene of one of the most debated mysteries in American folklore, the Delock Giants. According to accounts from native tribes and discoveries made inside the cave, in ancient times there was a race of tall humans, supposedly red-haired, aggressive, and physically superior, who inhabited the region before being exterminated. But what is the truth behind this story? Is it all myth? Was there any real basis for it? And what was really found in that dusty cave? The story begins with the Paiutes, an indigenous nation native to the western United States. Since ancient times, the Paiutes have passed down an oral account of a hostile group of giants called the Saitika. According to legend, these beings were over 2 meters tall and had reddish hair. They were cannibals, feared by the surrounding tribes, and used to attack settlements, kidnap people, and store human flesh. They were said to live in caves and were eventually cornered by a coalition of native tribes who, fed up with their abuses, defeated them. The last survivors, according to the story, were burned alive inside a cave sealed with branches and fire. The story was told as an ancestral myth until the 20th century, when discoveries began to emerge that many interpreted as evidence. In 1911, miners from Hanau, who used bat excrement as fertilizer, began excavating the Overlock Cave. Located near the present-day village of Overlock, the cave was dark, deep, and rich in organic material. During the excavation, workers began to find strange artifacts, tools, sandals, baskets, bone remains, and eventually human remains. This attracted the attention of archaeologists, who began a more systematic excavation in the following years. One of the most talked about finds was that of human skeletons, which according to initial reports were unusually large. Some witnesses claimed that they were between 2 and 25 meters tall. Woven sandals were also found that did not fit the feet of average-sized people. One of the skeletons was said to be over 23 meters tall and had reddish hair. Added to this were reports of large skulls, abnormal proportions, and tools that appeared to have required superhuman strength. However, as time passed, the records became fragmented. Many of the objects were sent to state museums, such as the Nevada State Museum, while others simply disappeared. Official reports began to refer to tall skeletons, but not necessarily giants. Institutional archaeology was skeptical of the more extraordinary claims and attributed the accounts to exaggeration, measurement errors, or misrepresentation. But independent researchers and proponents of alternative theories did not give up. Many argue that there was an attempt to silence or downplay the find. They alleged that certain bones were never shown to the public, that some were removed by private collectors, and that the story of the giants was dismissed too quickly. They point out that the Paiute were not known for inventing mythology for no purpose, and that their insistence on the existence of the Lositica could be based on real events passed down orally. In addition, other archaeological discoveries in the Americas have fueled the idea that unusually tall people existed in the past. Human remains exceeding 2 m in height have been documented at different times and places. Although in many cases these are exceptional individuals, not entire populations. The pattern has served as a basis for speculation about giant cultures in ancient times. Returning to the Ovolo Cave, another striking feature is the sophistication of the objects found there. More than 10,000 artifacts were recovered, including objects made of stone, bone, plant fiber, and wood. Dolls, mortars, hunting tools, and food remains were found. Some objects date back more than 4,000 years, making the cave a site of prolonged and complex human occupation. But among all these findings, what has most endured in the collective imagination are the remains of the supposed giants. Skeptics have their own version. They claim that the skeletons were measured incorrectly, that the red hair could have been due to oxidation of the pigment after centuries of exposure to extreme conditions, and that the large sandals could have been worn for ceremonial purposes or by large people, but within the normal range of human variation. They also point out that no scientific institution would find genetic or anatomical evidence to suggest the existence of a race of giants in the region. And yet, interest in the giants of Ovlok has not waned. Some researchers believe that there is a truth buried under centuries of earth and silence. They claim that fossils have been found that were never analyzed with modern technology, that hidden photographs exist, and that the oral tradition of the natives should not be underestimated. In their view, what happened in Lovelock was the discovery of a unique human culture, perhaps even distinct from the historically documented tribes, which lived and disappeared, leaving only scattered fragments behind. Beyond the bones, the most enigmatic thing is the convergence between myth and matter. The Paiute legends did not speak of symbolic figures, but of specific enemies who lived in real places, had specific customs, and were defeated in a clearly transmitted historical event. That remains were later found in the same place, mentioned by oral tradition, cannot be easily ignored. Today, the Ovolo Cave is a tourist attraction, but its original contents have been largely removed. Some museums still display pieces from the collection, although without explicitly linking them to the giants. The debate remains open between those who consider the story to be an unfounded exaggeration and those who believe that at one time, in the heart of the Nevada desert, human beings walked who defied our modern notions of what is possible. Were they really giants, or were they simply tall individuals misinterpreted in a context of native mythology? What secrets does the earth still hold beneath Lovelock? The story of the Nevada giants reminds us that the line between archaeology and legend is sometimes thinner than we think, that the past is vast and often stranger than fiction. In the heart of Transylvania, in the Romanian city of Sibiu, one of the most unusual and enigmatic documents in technological history was discovered. An ancient manuscript that describes in astonishing detail the operation of multistage rockets, propulsion weapons, and devices that should not have existed in the 10th century. This text, known as the Sibiu manuscript, raises a puzzling question. How could someone more than 400 years ago have imagined technologies that were centuries ahead of their time? The document was found by chance in the SBW archives in 1961 by engineer German Obert, one of the fathers of modern astronautics. Obert was perplexed when he reviewed the pages of the manuscript. Inside, he found more than 450 drawings and technical diagrams accompanied by detailed explanations in an ancient German dialect. The author of the text identified himself as Konrad Haas, an Austrian military engineer working for the Habsburg Empire. What is surprising about the manuscript is not only its existence, but the specific content it describes. Among the diagrams are multi-stage rockets, a concept that would not be developed in practical form until the mid-20th century. Mechanisms for separating sections of a rocket during flight are described, as are designs for stabilizing the trajectory with fins and staged ignition systems to prolong thrust. In addition, ideas such as the use of combined liquid and solid fuels and the design of launchers and ramps resembling modern missile launchers are mentioned. All this, let us remember, was written around the year 155, at a time when gunpowder was mainly used in cannons and rudimentary firearms, and when the concept of space travel was pure fantasy. there was still no clear understanding of the physics of flight, aerodynamics, or propulsion as a science. That is why the Cebu manuscript is not only puzzling, but defies all historical logic. Conrad Has was not a completely unknown name. In his day, he was a military engineer working on weapons design for the Imperial Army, but he had never been credited with a work of this magnitude. In the manuscript, Joss not only details the technical aspects of his designs, but also introduces philosophical and ethical considerations. He writes about the need to use technology for peaceful purposes and criticizes the use of gunpowder solely for destructive purposes. He even raises the possibility of using rockets for exploration, which is completely unusual for his time. One of the most striking passages in the manuscript reads, "My advice is to use these inventions only for peaceful purposes, never for war," in a technical document from the 10th century. This is deeply unusual and shows that the author was thinking not only about the technology, but also about the moral implications of his ideas. The academic community has debated the authenticity of the manuscript intensely. Some argue that it is a modern forgery made with the aim of confusing or attracting attention. However, analysis of the paper, ink, and calligraphy has confirmed that it is an authentic 10th century document. It was not invented in the 20th century, nor is it a modern hoax. The technical language used also corresponds to the style of the time, although what it describes is incredibly advanced for many. Other experts believe that Conrad Haas was not an isolated visionary, but part of a tradition of military engineers who experimented with simple rockets on the battlefield. In the 15th and 10th centuries in Europe and Asia, there were primitive forms of rockets that were more like projectiles with gunpowder than true propulsion devices. But even in that context, Joss' ideas are far superior in complexity and refinement. For example, the concept of multiple stages does not appear in any other known source until at least the 20th century. It is an essential principle in modern rockets, dividing the device into parts that detach during flight to lighten the weight and increase efficiency. This requires not only technical intuition, but an understanding of physics that was hardly available in the 10th century. The manuscript also includes detailed depictions of mobile launchers, steering systems, and vehicles with multiple propulsion tubes. Some of the drawings bear an uncanny resemblance to modern rockets with aerodynamic shapes, stabilizers, and exhaust nozzles. These are not mere doodles or artistic fantasies, but functional designs intended to be built. It is possible that Joss was imagining these ideas without ever having tested them. Or did prototypes exist that were lost over time? So far, no 10th century rocket built according to these designs have been found, but there is also no evidence that Joss was merely a theorist. Some military records mention that he ran armament workshops and had access to materials and labor. It is plausible that he built scale models or even attempted experimental launches, although if he did, the results have been lost to history. Another theory suggests that the knowledge contained in the SBU manuscript comes from older sources. Some researchers point to the possibility that Joss was passing on ideas he had received from earlier manuscripts, perhaps even from forgotten cultures or esoteric traditions. There are those who have sought to link the manuscript to Hermetic or alchemical knowledge, or even, as is often the case with historical enigmas, to theories about contact with advanced civilizations in the distant past. While these latter hypotheses lack academic support, they reflect the amazement that the manuscript inspires. This is not just an old document with curious drawings, but a technical text that is precise, coherent, and radically ahead of its time. What in other times would have been considered heresy, science fiction, or madness appears here as rational, detailed reflection, illustrated with the meticulousness of a modern engineer. Today, the Cebu manuscript is preserved in the State Archives of Romania. It has been the subject of numerous studies, conferences, and analyses. And although it is recognized as an authentic document, it still raises more questions than answers. How close was Rad Haas to changing the history of technology? Was he ignored, censored, or simply forgotten? And how many other manuscripts with revolutionary ideas may have been lost, burned, or yet to be discovered in dusty libraries around the world. Ultimately, the Cebu manuscript is a window into the possibility that human genius does not always advance in a straight line. Sometimes sparks of the future emerge from the most unexpected corners of the past, ideas that challenge official chronologies, forcing us to rewrite what we thought we knew and reminding us that history is full of visionaries whose light, for one reason or another, was extinguished too soon. For years, December 21st, 2012, was a date that captured the world's imagination. In the media, books, movies, and internet forums, a shocking claim was repeated. The Mayans predicted that this day would be the end of the world. There was talk of natural disasters, magnetic reversals, planetary alignments, and even a supposed collision with an invisible planet called Nibiru. Some people prepared by building shelters. Others expected a spiritual awakening, and many more simply mocked the whole thing. But what did the Mayan calendar really say? Did it truly anticipate an apocalypse, or was it a misinterpretation, exaggeration, or even manipulation? To understand the origin of the debate, we must first understand how the ancient Mayans measured time. Their calendar system was one of the most sophisticated of ancient times, consisting of several interlocking calendars. The HAB, a 365-day solar calendar, the 260-day ritual thoken, and a long count, which is the key to the matter. The latter was a numerical system that allowed the Maya to record exact dates in time, both past and future, using a vigesimal base instead of the decimal system we use. The long count did not measure years as we do, but rather vactans, periods of approximately 394 years. The calendar begins on what today corresponds to August 11th, 3114 BC, a date that for the Maya represented the beginning of the current era. This era, according to their system, would last 13 vactans, that is, until December 21st, 2012. And that is where the controversy arises. When archaeologists translated the glyphs indicating that date, many began to speculate. If 13 vactans marked the end of a great cycle, did that mean that the world was going to end? In fact, experts on Mayan civilization insist that it did not. For the Mayans, cycles did not end definitively, but rather restarted. Just as for us, December 31st does not represent the end of time, but rather the end of a year. For the Mayans, the end of the back end represented the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. There is no clear evidence that they believed in an apocalyptic end. Instead, they saw time as cyclical, a continuous flow of renewal, death, and rebirth. One of the key pieces that fueled the confusion was Monument 6 at Tortuguero, an inscription found at an archaeological site in Tabasco, Mexico. This monument refers to the date 130000 in the long count, which corresponds to December 2012. The text says that on that day, Balinyacht, a deity associated with change, war, and transformation, will descend. But the text is damaged and incomplete. It does not mention total destruction or the end of the world. Some interpret it as a prophecy of the return of that deity, not unlike other traditions where certain gods return at key moments, but nothing suggests a definitive catastrophe. The popularization of 2012 as the end of the world began mainly outside the academic sphere. Books such as The Mayan Code by Barbara Honclaw and The Mayan Factor by Jose Argaiz presented esoteric and alternative interpretations of the calendar. Argaiz, in particular, proposed that 2012 would be a spiritual turning point for humanity, a kind of portal to a new collective consciousness. These ideas, although influential in New Age circles, were not based on rigorous archaeological studies, but on personal interpretations, mixtures of astrology, psychology, and modern symbolism. Over time, Hollywood also did its part. The movie 2012, directed by Roland Emmerich and released in 2009, showed the world sinking under tsunamis, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. It was a box office hit, but it reinforced a totally fictional view of the Mayan calendar, associating it with global cataclysms with no basis in historical reality. Meanwhile, serious researchers tried to explain that the Mayans never predicted the end of the world. Many scholars, such as epigraphist David Stewart, have pointed out that the Mayans spoke of dates far beyond 2012. Some temples mention future dates, including periods that would reach thousands or even millions of years. This shows that for them, time did not end in a single cycle, but simply began another. What 2012 did represent, in a way, was a cultural shift. During that year, the world's attention was focused for a moment on an ancient civilization, its astronomical knowledge, its impressive architecture, and its view of time. In that sense, it served to spark interest in Mayan history. Many took the opportunity to learn about their hieroglyphic writing, their advanced mathematics, which included the concept of zero long before Europe, their art, and their mythology. And yet, it also showed how easy it is to distort history when it is mixed with modern expectations, fear, and commercialization. The case of the Mayan calendar in 2012 is a clear example of how a piece of archaeological information can be taken and transformed into a completely different narrative, more appealing to the public but disconnected from the facts. Even after the date passed without catastrophic events, many continued to search for a hidden meaning. Some said that it was not a physical end, but a symbolic one, that the world did not end, but the world as we knew it did, that it was an energetic shift, a transition of consciousness that we are still processing. These interpretations, although difficult to verify, keep alive the idea that 2012 meant something special, even if it was not the apocalypse. Ultimately, what really happened in December 2012 was the end of a 5,125-year cycle, according to the Mayan calendar, an important date in their view of time, comparable to a millennium in our calendar. For the Mayans, it was an opportunity for renewal, not destruction. A Genesu, a continuation. The myth of the end of the world was largely a modern construct driven by a fascination with the mysterious, anxiety about the future, and the human desire to find meaning in the patterns of time. What remains today is a valuable lesson that we must approach ancestral knowledge with respect, curiosity, and care, avoiding projecting our own ideas onto cultures that thought in ways very different from our own. Thus, the Mayan calendar did not predict the apocalypse. It predicted a new beginning. And although 2012 is now behind us, its story reminds us that true wisdom lies in the cycles that teach us to live with balance, with an awareness of time, and with the humility of knowing that the world does not end on a single date, but is constantly transforming. Constantly, as the Mayans understood thousands of years ago. In the depths of the Arabian Sea, off the coast of the state of Gujarat in western India, lie the ruins of a city that has puzzled archaeologists, historians, and believers for decades. This is Dwarka, a submerged city that, according to sacred Hindu texts, was the home of the god Krishna. For centuries, Dwarka was considered a mythological legend, a literary creation of ancient religious texts. But the discovery of structures under the sea, aligned with the location described in those scriptures, has revived the debate. Is it possible that a city mentioned in texts considered mythological was real? And if so, why is it underwater? And how old is it really? The name Dwarka means gate or city of gates in Sanskrit. In the Mahabharata epic, one of the most important texts in Hinduism, Dwarka is described as a majestic city built by Krishna. It is said that it was built on the coast of the to keep Krishna away from the constant conflicts in Mathura, his hometown. According to the text, Dwarka was built on land that emerged from the ocean. It was rich, fortified, and had palaces, temples, gardens, and advanced urban planning. However, after Krishna's death, the city was swallowed by the sea, fulfilling a prophecy that sealed the end of an era. For centuries, this story was believed to be just a myth. Oral tradition and Hindu texts spoke of Dwarka as part of a spiritual narrative, not as a city that actually existed. But everything changed at the end of the 20th century when researchers from India's National Institute of Oceanography began studying the seabed near the Gulf of Kambat, Okambai, and later off the modern city of Dwarka, also in Gujarat. What they found was surprising. About 30 m below the sea, divers and sonar equipment detected regular structures, rectangular stone blocks, possible walls, columns, and what appear to be paved roads. Artifacts such as stone anchors, pottery, tools, and fragments of sculptures were also found. The layout of the structures suggested organized urban planning with geometric alignments that can hardly be explained by natural processes. One of the most controversial finds occurred in 2001 in the Gulf of Kanat, where formations were reported at a depth of more than 30 m extending over several kilometers. Sonar images revealed what appeared to be building foundations, roads, and grids that could correspond to a submerged city. Artifacts were subsequently recovered from the site, including a piece of fossilized wood that, according to carbon testing carried out in Indian laboratories, was dated to more than 9,000 years ago. If accurate, this would place the city long before the great civilizations known as Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Indus Valley. But this is where the controversy begins. Many archaeologists, especially in Western academic circles, have questioned the validity of these dates. They argue that the piece of wood could have arrived at the site by natural means and not be direct evidence of human construction at that time. They also point to the lack of systematic excavations on the seabed, which prevents a conclusive interpretation. However, for many scholars and believers in India, the findings under the sea confirm what the scriptures have said for millennia, that Dwarka was real, that Krishna was a historical figure as well as a divine one, and that the stories contained in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavata Purana should not be seen as mere allegories, but as accounts based on real events. In 1983, underwater archaeologist Mr. Rao, one of the pioneers in the investigation of Dwarka, led excavations near the coast to the modern city. Rao found structures aligned with the ancient account, stone walls, platforms, stairs, and other evidence of advanced urban planning. According to him, these structures belonged to a port city that was swallowed by the sea due to a rise in sea level or tectonic movements. The geological history of the region partly supports this theory. It is known that sea levels have fluctuated over the last 10,000 years, and that coastal areas have been gradually submerged. An earthquake or tsunami could also have caused a sudden collapse, similar to what happened to other port cities in different parts of the world. But the main point of debate remains the date. Proponents of an ancient Dwarka claim that the city may be between 9,000 and 12,000 years old, which would radically change our understanding of human history. It would place an urbanized civilization much earlier than is currently accepted. Official history states that agriculture began around 10,000 years ago and that the first cities appeared thousands of years later. If Dwarka is as ancient as some suggest, it would mean that an advanced society existed long before the emergence of traditional civilizations. Critics, however, insist that there is not enough evidence to support such a claim. They say that the underwater remains have not yet been fully analyzed, that there are no inscriptions, texts, or unequivocal evidence of an advanced urban culture at that time. They point out that the findings could be natural formations or remnants of more recent occupations that were affected by the sea. Despite the controversies, interest in Dwarka has not waned. In fact, it has grown. The Indian government has funded multiple archaeological missions, and some scholars have proposed turning the modern city of Dwarka into an international center for archaeological research. Underwater explorations are now continuing with more advanced technology, such as robotic vehicles and high-resolution sonar. Beyond the archaeological evidence, Dwar has acquired a deep symbolic value. It is a meeting point between myth and history, between faith and science. It represents the possibility that what we now consider mythology may have real roots, not in the literal sense of miracles or divinities, but in the settings, cities, and people who, over generations, were transformed into legend. Such discoveries also force us to rethink how we value ancient knowledge. For a long time, sacred or epic texts were seen solely as fantasy or allegory. But in many cases, such as with Troy and the Iliad, archaeology has shown that the line between myth and reality is thinner than it seems. Dwarka could be another example of this. In conclusion, the sunken city of Dwarka is one of the most exciting enigmas of the ancient world. Mentioned in religious writings for millennia, rediscovered at the bottom of the sea, and still shrouded in debate, it represents a bridge between the past and the present, between faith and science. We may not yet be able to say with certainty when it was built, who inhabited it, or why it disappeared. But its mere existence under the sea reminds us that history still holds unfathomable secrets, and that perhaps many other cities and civilizations that we consider myths are simply waiting to be rediscovered under layers of water, sand, and time. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island, at the western tip of Japan, lies one of the world's most controversial underwater discoveries. A series of massive stone structures that look like steps, platforms, walls, and terraces aligned with surprising precision are known as the Yonaguni Ruins. These formations have been the subject of intense debate since their discovery in the 1980s. Are they natural formations sculpted by erosion? Or are they the remains of an advanced civilization that existed thousands of years before the end of the last ice age? Could this be an archaeological site so ancient that it would force us to rewrite the history of humanity in Asia? It all began in 1986 when diving instructor Kiichiro Aratake was exploring the waters near Yonaguni Island in search of new sites for underwater tourism. During a dive, he came across what appeared to be a huge stone structure with geometric shapes. It was a kind of step platform that descended in levels like a pyramid or a megalithic construction. Intrigued by its appearance, he informed other researchers, and over time the site began to attract the attention of geologists, archaeologists, and explorers from around the world. What can be seen underwater is stunning. A large sandstone platform with right angles, perfectly delineated corners, wide steps, channels, and what appear to be columns, doors, and paths. Some divers have reported structures resembling stairways rising and falling through several levels. Formation ressembling. Squares, straight walls tens of meters long, and others reminiscent of structures, such as truncated pyramids or amphitheaters, have also been identified. Japanese geologist Masaaki Kimura was one of the leading researchers studying Yonaguni. After multiple dives and years of analysis, Kimura proposed that the structures were, at least in part, man-made. According to him, what lies beneath the sea is not simply a geological formation, but a city built by human hands that was submerged after sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, approximately 10,000 years ago. For Kimura, the Yonaguni ruins are proof that an advanced civilization existed in Asia long before official history acknowledges. This claim caused quite a stir in the scientific community. If the structures were indeed man-made and so ancient, it would imply that a civilization capable of carving megalithic monuments inhabited the region at a time when, according to conventional archaeology, humanity was just beginning to develop agriculture and basic tools in some parts of the world. Yonaguni would challenge that chronology. Kimura and his team pointed to several aspects that supported their hypothesis. The precise geometric alignment of the structures, the apparent presence of symbols carved into the rock, what could be paths or canals, and other formations that look like retaining walls or artificial terraces. They also pointed to the existence of similar formations in other areas of the region, which would suggest that Yonaguni was not an isolated case, but part of a wider cultural network. However, other experts have been much more skeptical. One of the leading critics has been geologist Robert C.H., known for his work on the Giza Sphinx. C.H. conducted independent studies at Yonaguni and concluded that the structures can be explained as natural formations. According to him, the sedimentary rock in the region, combined with the action of waves, earthquakes, and erosion, can produce surprisingly straight shapes with angles and cuts that appear to be man-made. He argues that the human brain tends to look for patterns, and that what some interpret as stairways or doors may be the result of well-known geological processes. Sea erosion, especially in environments with horizontal and vertical fractures in the rock, can produce flat shapes, straight lines, and terrace-like structures. CHCH also stated that he found no conclusive evidence of humans in the rocks or associated archaeological objects, such as tools, pottery, organic remains, or inscriptions that would prove that the site was inhabited. Despite this, many explorers, alternative researchers, and enthusiasts of lost civilizations continue to believe that Yonaguni is more than a geological coincidence. Some link it to Japanese or Chinese legends about sunken lands. Others relate it to the mythical Lemuria Mu, a supposed advanced civilization that is said to have existed in the Pacific Ocean before being destroyed by cataclysms. These theories, although unsupported by science, reflect the global fascination with the possibility of lost cultures. Beyond interpretations, there are geological facts that support the possibility of ancient submersion. During the end of the last ice age, between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago, sea levels rose dramatically worldwide due to melting glaciers, leaving many coastal regions underwater. Some ancient structures in other parts of the world, such as those discovered off the coast of India or in the Mediterranean, also appear to have been submerged during this period. Therefore, it is not impossible that Yonaguni was once on dry land thousands of years ago. Despite the debate, a full archaeological excavation has not yet been conducted at the site. Underwater conditions are difficult, and funding for a comprehensive study has been limited. This has left many questions unanswered. If there was a civilization, who were they? Where are their cultural remains? Why are there no other related sites on land? Some proponents of the artificial theory argue that erosion and the passage of time would have destroyed many of the remains. Others believe that not enough has been searched or that the visible structures are only the top of a larger city buried under marine sediments. On a symbolic level, the Yonaguni ruins represent more than a technical debate. They are a reminder of how much we don't know about the human past, of how many chapters of our history may have been lost under the water, erased by time, or discarded because they don't fit into established narratives. They also reflect how mystery and science coexist in tension. On the one hand, there is the desire to find a lost civilization. On the other, there is the rigor of geology, which demands hard evidence. Today, Yonaguni has become a place of pilgrimage for divers, adventurers, and dreamers. Underwater tourism has increased, and the region has benefited from global interest. But beyond the visual appeal, the question remains floating beneath the waves. Are we looking at the remains of a forgotten ancient city, or simply the natural sculptures of a patient ocean? Whatever the answer, the structures of Yonaguni will continue to arouse curiosity. They challenge us to look closely, to investigate without prejudice, and to accept that in some cases the boundaries between the natural and the artificial, between myth and history, are not as clear as we would like. In the silence of the ocean, the stones of Yonaguni hold a secret, perhaps human, perhaps not, but undoubtedly fascinating. In the world of archaeology, there are objects that, due to their rarity, beauty, or mystery, manage to fascinate for centuries without offering clear answers. The Phaistos disc is one such enigma. Discovered in 1908 on the island of Crete, this small clay disc has baffled experts around the world. Its surface is covered with a series of carefully printed symbols, arranged in a spiral from the edge to the center and engraved with such precision that it does not appear to be an improvised creation, but rather the result of advanced technology for its time. More than a century after its discovery, no one has been able to decipher with certainty what these symbols mean, what language they represent, or even whether we are looking at real writing or something completely different. It is an Oluzu prayer, a game of forgery. Each theory raises new questions, and the disc remains one of the greatest mysteries of ancient archaeology. The object was found by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier during excavations at the Minoan Palace of Phaistos in southern Crete. The site, which had been partially destroyed by earthquakes and then abandoned, is one of the most important of the Minoan civilization. This civilization flourished between 2600 and 1100 BC, long before classical Greece. The disk was found in an underground room along with other objects, although it was not accompanied by any other similar artifacts, which made it difficult to contextualize from the outset. The disk itself measures about 15 centimeters in diameter and is only 1 centimeter thick. It is made of fired clay, and the most striking feature are its symbols, 241 signs in total distributed in 61 sections divided by lines. The signs were printed on the soft clay using stamps, a very rare technique for the time that resembles a primitive form of printing. This suggests that there was an organized collection of pre-established symbols, a kind of ancestral typography, which leads us to believe that it was not a unique creation, but part of a larger writing system. There are 45 different symbols on the entire disk. Some represent human figures, heads with headdresses, animals such as birds or fish, tools, plants, and abstract shapes. These signs are arranged in a spiral, which is also unusual. Instead of writing in straight lines, as in most known systems, the text on the festo disk begins at the outer edge and winds toward the center. This form of presentation is not only aesthetic, it could also have a ritual, symbolic, or practical meaning. One of the most basic questions remains unanswered. What language is the disk written in? Some researchers have tried to link it to Linear A or Linear B, the other writing systems used by the Minoans and Mycenaeans in the same region. However, the symbols on the Phaistos disk do not match either of these systems, nor do they appear to be related to Egyptian hieroglyphics, Semitic alphabets, or other known ancient scripts. This has led to speculation that it could represent a completely different language, perhaps from a civilization that disappeared without a trace, or even that it was a ceremonial or artificial language created for a specific purpose. Theories about its meaning are as numerous as they are diverse. Some have suggested that it is a religious hymn dedicated to a goddess or a sacred figure. Others believe that it could be a game board, a ritual calendar, a list of offerings, or a magic spell. There are also those who have suggested that it is a primitive form of poetry or a fragment of a play. Since no other text has been found using the same system, it is very difficult to verify any of these ideas. The lack of context is the biggest obstacle. One of the most puzzling elements of the disk is precisely that it appears to be unique. No other object with the same writing has been found either in Crete or anywhere else in the world. This has led some to doubt even its authenticity. What if the disk is a forgery, a modern creation intentionally placed among the ruins to deceive archaeologists? This theory, although minority, has been put forward by some scholars who point out that the use of stamps to print the symbols does not match other known methods of writing in the 2nd millennium BC. However, most experts consider the Phaistos disk to be authentic based on analysis of the clay, the depth of the signs, and the context in which it was found. Furthermore, its technical complexity suggests that it was not an improvised or recent creation. The fact that it was discovered at a time when archaeological forgeries were not as common or as sophisticated as they are today also supports its authenticity. Another clue that has generated debate is the repeated use of certain symbols. Some appear frequently, sometimes in sequences that repeat as if they were words or formulas. This has led several researchers to apply cryptographic methods, linguistic statistics, and phonetic comparisons to try to decipher the text. But so far, no interpretation has been accepted as definitive by the scientific community. In recent years, advances in technology have allowed digital scans of the disk, three-dimensional analyses of its grooves, and more detailed studies of the signs. Artificial intelligence algorithms have also been used to try to decipher patterns that could indicate grammatical repetitions, syntactic structures, or symbolic meanings. Even so, the mystery remains intact. Some alternative researchers have gone further and linked the Festo disk to esoteric or even extraterrestrial theories. According to these ideas, the disk does not belong to any known civilization, but is rather a legacy of a forgotten people or visitors from other worlds. These theories, although popular in sensationalist media, lack scientific basis. However, They reflect the disk's power to spark the collective imagination and become a symbol of the unknown. The truth is that the Festo disk defies our categories. It does not fit completely into the archaeological, linguistic, or artistic categories. It is halfway between writing and symbol, between functional object and ritual artifact. And perhaps that is what makes it so intriguing. It represents a moment frozen in time, a message written more than 3,000 years ago that no one can read. It is as if a voice from the past is trying to speak to us from afar, but the language has been lost, and all we are left with is the form, the texture, and the mystery. In conclusion, the Festo disc is one of the most enigmatic pieces of antiquity. Its discovery was a singular event. Its form of writing is unique, and its content remains a closed secret to this day. Perhaps one day, someone will find a key, a code, a Rosetta Stone that will allow us to read what those symbols say. Perhaps another disc will be discovered, another similar object that will provide context. But in the meantime, it will remain one of the great enigmas of human history. A silent, round, spiral-shaped work that holds within its symbols the echo of a voice we have not yet learned to hear. Deep in the western desert of Egypt, among the seemingly endless sands, lies a story that has baffled explorers, historians, and archaeologists for centuries. It is the enigmatic fate of the so-called Lost Army of Cambyses, a force of 50,000 Persian soldiers who, according to ancient chronicles, disappeared without a trace while crossing the desert towards the oasis of Sigwa. The most widely accepted version claims that a gigantic sandstorm completely buried them, wiping them off the map as if they had never existed. No bodies, no weapons, no ruins, no clear signs. Only sand and mystery. The story begins in 525 BC, when Cambyses I, king of the Persian Empire and son of Cyrus the Great, was leading the Persian expansion into Egypt. After conquering Memphis and subjugating Pharaoh Samadin III, Cambyses was not satisfied. According to classical sources, especially Herodotus, the Persian king intended to expand his dominion beyond the Nile to the oases of the Libyan desert and possibly as far as Carthage. It was then that he ordered an army of 50,000 men to be sent to the oasis of Siwa, famous for being home to the oracle of Ammonius, an Egyptian deity linked to Zeus. Some say that Cambyses wanted to destroy the oracle for having defied him, others that he sought divine legitimacy as the new ruler of Egypt. Herodotus, writing a century after the events, recounts that the army set out from Thebes, now Luxor, crossed the desert until it reached the city of Oasis, today known as Karga, and from there headed toward Sigwa. During the first few days, everything went according to plan. But at some point between the oasis of Karga and Sigwa, as they advanced through the desert, the unthinkable happened. Herodotus recounts it thus: when they were in the middle of the desert, a great wind arose from the south, laden with sand, which completely buried them. Thus they disappeared, and nothing more was ever heard of them. The story of an entire army wiped off the face of the earth by a storm seems more like legend than reality. But Herodotus' account was taken seriously for centuries, and several travelers and explorers tried to find some clue to the soldiers' fate. Despite this, no conclusive evidence appeared for centuries. No rusty swords, bones, shields, camp remains, or signs of battle. Nothing, just the desert. Some modern archaeologists have raised doubts about the veracity of the account. They point out that Herodotus did not witness the events and that his information comes from oral accounts. Furthermore, they believe that a sandstorm, however violent, could hardly bury 50,000 men and their equipment without leaving any remains. Others, however, believe that the army did exist, and that, although Herodotus exaggerated, it may have been the victim of a devastating weather phenomenon, a sandstorm or a series of storms that disoriented them, separated them, and caused mass death from dehydration, heat stroke, and suffocation. In such a hostile environment, losing your bearings or running out of water can be lethal in a matter of hours. Modern interest in the mystery resurfaced with a vengeance in the 20th century. Beginning in the 1980s, several archaeologists and explorers attempted to locate the remains of a lost army. Some carried out expeditions from Sigua into the desert. Others used satellite images, ancient maps, and even local legends to chart possible routes. Among them were the brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, Italian archaeologists who in 1996 claimed to have found evidence of the tragedy in the Egyptian desert near the oasis of Baria. The Castigliones reported finding remains of ancient weapons, arrowheads, fragments of armor, human bones, and the remains of wagons buried under the sand. They claimed that these remains matched those of a Persian army from the 6th century BC and could therefore belong to the mythical Lost Army. The images and samples they presented were received with enthusiasm, but also with skepticism. The scientific community called for more solid evidence: carbon dating, comparative analysis, systematic excavations. Without clear confirmation, the Castiglione findings remained in limbo between possibility and doubt. To this day, there is no academic consensus on whether these remains really belong to Cambyses' army or some other more recent group. Another theory suggests that the army was not destroyed by the desert, but ambushed and wiped out by hostile tribes or local armies. In that case, the sandstorm would have been a mythical explanation to cover up a humiliating military failure. Some believe that the Persian troops, unaccustomed to the desert and without reliable guides, simply got lost and slowly died, with no one able to rescue them. What makes this mystery even more fascinating is its human dimension. Imagine 50,000 men marching under the relentless sun of the Sahara. Soldiers carrying weapons, provisions, water jugs, tents, each with a story, with fears, hopes, family. They marched obeying orders, trusting that they would reach their destination. At what point did they realize they were doomed? Was it sudden with a wall of sand rising from the horizon like a beast? Or was it gradual, with the heat exhausting them and the wind swallowing their footprints? They fought among themselves for water, tried to turn back, shouted in vain as the storm engulfed them. The desert gives no answers, only silence. Today, the myth of Cambyses' lost army lives on. It has inspired novels, documentaries, films, and reports. It has fed the collective imagination with the image of a ghost army buried beneath the dunes. And every so often, an expedition sets out into the desert in the hope of finding a rusty spear, a forgotten skull, an ancient helmet that confirms that it was not all legend. Technological advances, such as ground-penetrating radar and satellite analysis, may one day shed more light on the case. But in the meantime, the Lost Army will remain just that, a story between history and myth. Perhaps it really did exist and is buried several meters deep. Perhaps the story was invented or exaggerated, a warning about the power of the desert. Or perhaps the remains are there waiting for someone to hear what the sands of the Sahara have been whispering for more than 2 millennia. In any case, the mystery of Cambyses' lost army reminds us that even in an age of satellites and advanced technology, the past still holds secrets that we have not been able to unearth, and that in the most desolate places on the planet, where life seems impossible, some of the greatest stories ever told may be hidden. In the desert region of Ica, in southern Peru, a set of dark stones engraved with puzzling figures has sparked debate, research, and controversy for more than half a century. Known as the Ica stones, these rocks depict scenes that seem impossible according to official history. Human beings hunting, riding, or performing surgical operations on dinosaurs, men observing the stars with telescopes, unknown maps, and even medical procedures such as organ transplants and brain surgery. The implications of these images, if authentic, would be monumental. They would rewrite human history, question the chronology of evolution, and challenge everything we know about prehistory. But are they real, or are they an elaborate hoax that has endured thanks to the mystery they generate? The origin of the phenomenon dates back to the 1960s, when a Peruvian doctor named Javier Cabrera Darquilla became interested in some stones he was given as a birthday present. The first one, according to him, showed an engraving of what he identified as a type of extinct prehistoric fish. Intrigued, he began to investigate and soon found hundreds of similar stones in the Ica region. Many of them were sold by local farmers as curiosities or souvenirs, but Cabrera believed they were much more than that. He claimed that they were artifacts from a lost civilization with advanced scientific knowledge that had coexisted with dinosaurs. Over the years, Cabrera's collection grew enormously. He collected more than 11,000 stones and founded the Museum of Engraved Stones of Ica, where he exhibited them to the public. His hypothesis was clear and radical. An advanced human civilization existed millions of years ago, long before any known archaeological record. According to Cabrera, this culture not only coexisted with dinosaurs, but also mastered genetics, medicine, astronomy, and planetary geography. He claimed that they were capable of performing complex surgeries, designing celestial maps, and even migrating to other planets. The stones feature an incredible variety of subjects. Some show hunting scenes with weapons, others depict childbirth, operations with tools similar to scalpels, astronomical observations, and flights in what appear to be spaceships or technological devices. But without a doubt, the most striking are those showing dinosaurs, triceratops, stegosaurs, brontosaurs, and tyrannosaurs, all with fairly recognizable anatomical details. In many scenes, humans interact with these animals as if they were part of their everyday lives. The problem, of course, is that all available scientific evidence indicates that dinosaurs became extinct more than 65 million years ago, while modern humans appeared only a few 100,000 years ago. There has never been any fossil, archaeological, or genetic evidence to suggest that the two species coexisted. Therefore, if the stones were authentic, they would completely change our understanding of time, evolution, and human history. This contradiction is what has generated enormous skepticism in the scientific community. Many archaeologists, paleontologists, and anthropologists who have studied the case agree that the stones cannot be considered valid evidence without a clear context. And that is one of the biggest problems. The stones were not found in controlled archaeological excavations, but appeared in markets and were handed over by farmers who were never able to prove the exact place of their discovery. In addition, during the 1970s, several farmers in the area admitted to having made the stones themselves to sell to tourists and collectors. One of the best-known, Basilio Uchia, claimed to have carved the stones using knives, nails, and common tools. He even demonstrated how he did it, reproducing scenes similar to those in Cabrera's museum. In interviews, he said that he never thought anyone would take them seriously as ancient artifacts, and that he just wanted to make some money. This confession reinforced the fraud hypothesis. Despite these admissions, Cabrera remained firm in his position. He claimed that the real stones were different, that the imitations were easily detectable, and that the peasants were being pressured to recant. According to him, there was a conspiracy to hide the true history of humanity. He even argued that some of the engravings could not have been made by illiterate peasants due to their anatomical or symbolic complexity. Cabrera died in 2001 without having convinced the scientific community, but leaving behind a collection that is still visited today by curious visitors, believers, and skeptics alike. Since then, independent researchers have conducted analyses of the stones, including studies of patinas, engraving techniques, and dating. Some have pointed out that the patina on the incisions does not match the patina on the surface, indicating that the engravings are much more recent than the stone itself. Others have argued that the cuts are too shallow or show signs of having been made with modern tools. Furthermore, no traces of the tools used by the supposed civilization or additional cultural remains such as dwellings, temples, or utensils have been found. On the other hand, there are those who argue that although many stones may be fakes, the possibility that some are authentic. They point to the variety of symbols, the apparent consistency in styles, and the number of pieces as suggesting something more complex than a simple commercial hoax. Furthermore, alternative theories about lost civilizations, although not accepted by mainstream science, continue to hold great popular appeal. Ultimately, the Ica stones have become a symbol of the tension between established knowledge and alternative thinking. They represent the human desire to believe that there is something more than what history books tell us. For some, they are proof that science does not know everything and that the past may be much stranger than we imagine. For others, they are a warning about how easy it is to create myths, manipulate information, and generate pseudo-archaeological phenomena that confuse and entertain at the same time. Today, the stones remain in display cases, private collections, and photographs circulating on the internet. Some continue to study them with hope, others view them with skepticism, but all agree that their impact goes beyond archaeology. They force us to ask ourselves what we believe, why we believe it, and how we distinguish between truth and fantasy. Perhaps we will never know for sure the real origin of all the Ica stones. Perhaps some are fakes and others are not. Perhaps it is all a big hoax, or perhaps it is part of a truth not yet understood. But as long as they continue to provoke questions, challenge certainties, and fuel the collective imagination, they will remain one of the most fascinating mysteries of Peru and the world. Deep in the Amazon rainforest, shrouded in a thick fog of vegetation and mystery, lies a legend that has fascinated generations of explorers, scientists, and dreamers. The lost city of Z, an ancient metropolis, rich in gold, knowledge, and civilization, hidden in some corner of the wildest territory on the planet. This city was the obsessive goal of Colonel Percy Harrison Fusett, a respected British military man and cartographer, whose search led him deep into the heart of the Amazon in the early 20th century. And it was precisely there that he and his expedition disappeared without a trace, fueling one of the greatest enigmas of the last century. Fusett was no ordinary adventurer. Born in 1867 in England, he had served as an army officer and was trained as a cartographer by the Royal Graphical Society, where he quickly earned a reputation for precision and courage. Between 1906 and 1924, Fusett undertook multiple expeditions in South America, particularly in the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. It was there that he heard persistent rumors among local tribes, settlers, and old documents about the existence of a forgotten city covered by the jungle, built by an advanced civilization that had existed long before the arrival of Europeans. In 1920, Fusett gained access to a document known as the 512 manuscript, a chronicle written in the 16th century by a Portuguese explorer, who claimed to have found the ruins of a monumental city in the interior of Brazil. The manuscript described stone walls, paved streets, sculptures, and unknown hieroglyphics. Although it did not provide a precise location, for Fusett, it was definitive proof that the city existed. He called it Z, not for any particular reason, but as a way of symbolizing the end of known knowledge, the last great geographical discovery to be made. Convinced that Z was an Mato Grosso, Fusett prepared his most ambitious expedition. In 1925, accompanied by his 21-year-old son Jack Fusett and a close friend named Rayleigh Rimmel, he ventured into the Amazon from the city of Cuiabá. The expedition was well organized, though deliberately light, to avoid attracting attention or relying on too many people. They carried basic provisions, weapons, compasses, a sextant, and some navigational instruments. Their plan was to cross the Singa River and continue eastward, deep into the region, where Fusett believed Z was located. The last known message from Fusett arrived on May 29, 1925. In a letter sent from a camp he named Dead Ore Camp, he announced that they were ready to advance into the most remote area. He wrote enthusiastically and without any signs of alarm. After that, nothing more was heard from him, his son, or his companion. No bodies, objects, or remains of the camp were found. They disappeared as if the jungle had swallowed them up. Fusett's disappearance became an international story. Between 1925 and 1952, at least 13 expeditions were carried out to find them or discover what had happened. Some of them were disastrous, causing further deaths and disappearances. Theories about their fate were as diverse as they were fantastical. Some believed they had been killed by hostile tribes. Others said they had died of disease or starvation. Some ventured that Fuzit had found Z and decided to stay there, becoming the leader of a secret civilization. There were even those who claimed to have seen him alive years later, living among the indigenous people. In 1951, an explorer named Orlando Villas-Boas claimed to have spoken with members of a tribe who confessed to killing the three men shortly after they entered indigenous territory. According to this version, Fuzit and his group had acted disrespectfully toward the rituals and customs of the place. However, no bodies or belongings were found to confirm this story. In 1965, the Royal Y Graphical Society organized another search with more modern technology, but it also failed to produce conclusive results to complex urban development. But that view has begun to change in recent decades thanks to new discoveries. Recent archaeological research has revealed a much richer reality. In remote areas of the Amazon, especially in Brazil and Bolivia, remains of geometric structures, roads, canals, agricultural terraces, and urban patterns have been found that indicate the existence of advanced societies before the arrival of Europeans. Thanks to technologies such as LiDAR, aerial laser detection, traces of settlements hidden under the vegetation have been detected that would have housed thousands of people. These discoveries do not prove the existence of City Z as Fawcett imagined it, but they do suggest that his intuition was not entirely wrong. The Amazon was not a wild and uninhabited region, but a place where sophisticated cultures flourished, capable of modifying their environment and creating complex forms of organization. The jungle did not erase Z, it hid it. Perhaps it was not a city with golden towers and majestic temples, but it was a network of interconnected communities with lost knowledge, advanced farming systems, and organized social structures. And perhaps that was Z, not a magical place, but evidence that human history is older, deeper, and more complex than we believe. The figure of Fit has been immortalized in books, documentaries, and films. In 2009, David Grann published The Lost City of Z, a work based on years of research that rekindled global interest in the explorer. In 2016, the book was adapted into a film of the same name. Fuzit became a symbol of the relentless pursuit of the unknown, of that human impulse that led him to face the impossible for a vision. His disappearance, far from extinguishing his legacy, turned him into a legend. Today, the lost city of Z remains one of the great unsolved enigmas of exploration. No one has proven its existence, but neither has it been completely refuted. And as long as the jungle keeps its secrets, there will always be those who listen to its story, look at a map of the Amazon, and feel the call of what has not yet been discovered. Because after all, what is Z? A real place, friendship, an obsession, or a way of reminding us that there are still mysteries waiting to be revealed in the wildest corners of the planet. High in the Peruvian Andes, more than 6,300 meters above sea level, an ancient secret lay dormant, shrouded in ice and silence. For centuries, the snow and cold preserved the body of an Inca girl as if time had stopped. She was not a dry mummy or a skeleton broken by the passage of centuries, but a young woman with a peaceful face and braided hair, dressed in ritual clothes, sleeping eternally in a fetal position. She was found in 1995 on the Amparo volcano by archaeologist Johann Reinhard and mountaineer Miguel Zarate. Since then, she has been known as the Lady of Amparo or the Ice Maiden. Her discovery opened a direct window into the spiritual world of the Incas and raised unanswered questions about human sacrifice, religion, and rituals of one of the most complex civilizations in the Americas. What makes this find unique is its level of preservation. Thanks to the extreme temperatures of the snow-capped volcano, the body of the young woman, approximately 13 to 15 years old, remained intact for more than 5 centuries. Her internal organs were complete, her skin still had pigmentation, and even her stomach contained traces of food, allowing researchers to obtain an exceptional amount of information about her life, her death, and the context in which she was sacrificed. According to forensic and archaeological studies, the Lady of Amparo was offered as part of a ritual called capicocha, a religious ceremony performed by the Incas to honor the gods, especially the apis, the spirits of the mountains. These sacrifices were considered sacred, not as punishments, but as offerings of purity. Rather than viewing them as cruel deaths, the Incas believed that the victims, almost always children or young nobles, were selected for their physical and spiritual perfection, and upon being sacrificed, they became messengers who would live forever with the gods. The maiden was probably chosen at a very young age. For months, perhaps years, she was carefully prepared. She was given a special diet, dressed in fine clothes, adorned with valuable objects when the time came, and taken on a pilgrimage to the top of the Amparo volcano. The walk was arduous, over frozen ground with oxygen decreasing with every step. Once at the top, she was handed over to the gods. Analysis indicates that she died from a blow to the head, probably while sedated or asleep. Some studies suggest that she was given coca and chicha, a fermented drink, before the sacrifice to induce drowsiness and minimize suffering. She was buried in a small ceremonial tomb along with offerings such as silver statuettes, seashells, fine textiles, and small ceramic objects. Everything was arranged with precision and symbolism as part of a larger ritual whose deeper meaning still eludes our modern understanding. But why was she chosen? What motivated her sacrifice? One possibility is that it was a response to a natural disaster, such as a volcanic eruption, a prolonged drought, or a plague that threatened the community. In the Inca worldview, nature was alive, and the gods could become angry or show their discontent through these events. Sacrifice was, then, a way of restoring balance. Another theory is that her death was part of the empire's expansion rites, in which offerings were made to mark spiritual and political control over new territories. Beyond the theories, the maiden's serene face has moved those who have seen her. There are no signs of distress or expression of pain. Some interpret it as a symbol of spiritual resignation, others as proof that she was given before the final blow. What is certain is that her presence conveys a sense of calm, as if she truly believed that her death was not an end, but a transformation. The discovery of the Lady of Amparo was not the only one. Following her discovery, more sacrificed children were found on other Indian peaks, such as Yaco, MTI, and Picu Picu. Each one revealed more details about the complex religious system of the Incas. But the maiden was the first and most complete, becoming an emblem of a silent history that the mountains had kept for centuries. Its display at the Santuarios Andinos Museum in Arequipa has been the subject of debate. While some value the opportunity to learn from the past and connect with an ancestral culture, others question whether it is ethical to display the body of a girl who was sacrificed as part of a vanished faith. Should she remain in a display case, viewed by thousands of eyes, or should she rest once again in the earth that welcomed her for 500 years? This dilemma touches on deeper issues: respect for the dead, the interpretation of the past, and the difference between science and spirituality. From the Inca perspective, her sacrifice was an act of honor, a glorious destiny. From a modern perspective, it is difficult not to see it as a tragedy, but perhaps both views are valid in their own contexts. The most surprising thing about this discovery is that it is not just an archaeological relic. The Lady of Amparo is a story frozen in time, a bridge between worlds. Through her body, we can learn about the diet of the time, the rituals, the clothing, the funeral techniques, and the worldview of an empire that, without writing books, left deep traces in the soul of the Andes. Her life and death remind us that behind every historical object there are real people with names, dreams, fears, and beliefs. Although we do not know her name, although we cannot hear her voice, she continues to speak to us from the top of the volcano. Ultimately, the Lady of Amparo remains a mystery. What did she think in her last days? Did she understand what was going to happen? Without pride or resignation, she was manipulated, venerated, or both at the same time. What we do know is that she was chosen to cross a threshold between the human and divine worlds, and that her body, sleeping under the snow, waited patiently until the modern world was ready to hear her story. A story that remains untold to this day. In 1965, Yale University presented the world with a discovery that promised to rewrite history: an ancient medieval map showing part of North America, almost 500 years before Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. It was the so-called Vinland map, a parchment that depicted, with shaky lines and aged ink, a fragment of the medieval world and a piece of land unknown west of Greenland, labeled Vinlandia Insula. According to some, this proved that the Vikings had not only reached America before Columbus, but that this knowledge had been recorded by Europeans centuries before the famous voyage of 1492. The possibility was astonishing. If the map was authentic, it would confirm what some Norse sagas had already suggested, that the Vikings, led by Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, had reached lands beyond Greenland around the year 1000. The sagas spoke of a place called Vinland, the land of wine, because of its fruits and abundant vegetation. Until then, many scholars had considered these stories to be exaggerations or myths. But with this map, it seemed that there was tangible evidence that the Old World knew about America long before Columbus. The map, supposedly dating from the 15th century, showed Europe, Asia, Africa, and to the left of Greenland, a large island with that mysterious name, Vinland. Everything seemed to line up with Viking stories. The excitement was immediate. Articles in scientific journals, news reports, documentaries, debates at universities around the world. It could be that everything we knew about the discovery of America was wrong, but from the beginning something didn't quite fit. The map appeared under strange circumstances. No one knew exactly who had owned it before. It was offered to Jill through a rare book collector with no clear chain of custody. In a world of ancient documents, that's already a red flag. Experts began to study it closely. They analyzed the ink, the parchment, the writing styles, and little by little, doubts began to arise. The ink appeared to contain modern elements, such as titanium dioxide, which were not used in the Middle Ages. Although the parchment appeared authentic, dating from the 15th century, the possibility that someone had used old material to make a fake map could not be ruled out. Furthermore, the cartographic style of the map did not entirely match other maps of the period. There were anomalies in the names, proportions, and drawing conventions. Some experts claimed that it looked like a modern forgery, made by someone with access to 20th century information, but trying to imitate the medieval style. For decades, the debate raged on. In the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, analyses came and went. Some defended its authenticity based on the historical context, on the geographical knowledge that may have existed in Scandinavian monasteries, on the possibility that certain Viking routes had been recorded by European monks. Others firmly maintained that it was a sophisticated hoax, probably created in the 20th century to attract attention or for commercial purposes. The most ironic thing of all is that even if the map were fake, that does not negate the fact that the Vikings actually reached America. In 1960, 5 years before the Vinland map was announced, archaeological remains were discovered at Elephant's Head in Newfoundland, Canada. There, a team led by Hyanestin found the ruins of a Viking village with wooden structures, iron tools, and remains that left no room for doubt. The Norsemen had been there around the year 1000. This finding, confirmed and accepted by the scientific community, was the first concrete evidence of European presence in America before Columbus. So, the Vinland map is caught in a paradox. Its authenticity remains a matter of dispute, but the story it supposedly told has already been confirmed by other means. Even so, it continues to fascinate, because if the map were real, it would prove that in some corner of medieval Europe there was specific knowledge of America centuries before the great voyages of exploration. In 2021, after further scientific research using more advanced technology, Yale University finally concluded that the map is fake. Detailed analysis of the ink definitively revealed modern compounds that could not have existed in the 15th century. The document had been created on ancient parchment, yes, but the map drawing and inscriptions have been added centuries later, probably in the mid-20th century. This conclusion did not end the mystery, it only changed its nature. Now, the big question is no longer whether Europeans knew about America before Columbus, but who forged the map? For what purpose? And how did they manage to deceive academic institutions for so long? Even the most skeptical experts had doubts for years. Was it an intellectual joke? An attempt at historical manipulation? A fraud to gain fame or money? The Vinland map is a reflection of how forgeries can sometimes become as powerful as real facts. Although we now consider it to be fake, its influence has been enormous. It has served to spur new research, to question accepted truths, to rethink the role of the Vikings in history, and to remind us that the past is not always as clear as we think it is. At its core, the map represents something deeper. Our desire to find what was lost, to discover forgotten stories, to understand who came first and what they knew about the world. Although the paper is fake, the emotion it generated was very real. And that makes it one of the most intriguing historical mysteries of the 20th century. What remains is a lesson about history itself, which is not always constructed with absolute truths, but with fragments, doubts, and intertwined stories. That sometimes a well-told lie can reveal deeper truths about our need to discover the past, and that even when the Vinland map turned out to be an illusion, the idea it represented, that of a world more connected than we think, continues to resonate throughout history as a haunting echo of the times. At the end of the 17th century, the world was in flames. The ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity were spreading from France like a fire that no one could stop. But in a corner of the Caribbean, those same ideas took on a brutal, unexpected, and unique form in human history. A slave rebellion that not only challenged the colonial order, but defeated it. We're talking about the Haitian Revolution, an event that forever changed the political map of the world and whose history is still shrouded in questions, contradictions, and amazement. Haiti, then known as Saint-Domingue, was the richest colony in the French Empire. Its economy was based on the cultivation of sugar, coffee, cotton, and other tropical products, all worked by more than 500,000 African slaves. It was a place of luxury for a few and of absolute horror for the majority. Conditions were inhumane, with grueling workdays, savage punishments, and a mortality rate so high that slave owners preferred to import new slaves rather than keep existing ones alive. Brutality was the norm, but so was fear. White people feared an uprising, and slaves dreamed of freedom. On August 14, 1791, at a place known as Boys Cayman, a voodoo ceremony was held where leaders of different slave groups swore to start a rebellion. A week later, sugar mills were burning. Throughout the colony, hundreds of plantations were attacked. The slaves took up machetes, torches, and stones. They had no military training or modern weapons, but they did have a will that had been building for generations. What began as a brutal uprising eventually became an organized revolution, and amid the chaos, a key figure emerged. Toussaint, born a slave and educated by Jesuit priests, Toussaint was a brilliant, cunning, charismatic, and deeply strategic man. Over time, he became the most important military and political leader of the movement. He managed to unite divided factions, form disciplined armies, establish alliances with the Spanish and British, and put French troops in check. But here begins the real mystery. How was it possible for a slave revolt to defeat one of the most powerful empires on the planet? Part of the answer lies in the skill of its leaders. Two knew how to seize the moment. France was in the midst of revolution, internally divided, facing wars in Europe, and trying to maintain control of its colonies. When the French abolished slavery in 1794, they did so in part to avoid losing Saint-Domingue. Toussaint then joined them, but not out of ideological loyalty. He did so for strategic reasons, because he knew that this alliance would allow him to consolidate his power. Moreover, the slaves were not just victims. Many were African warriors brought directly from the continent with combat experience. They knew the land, the roads, the rivers. They used guerrilla tactics, moved quickly, and attacked by surprise. Each destroyed plantation was a symbol, a warning, an emotional victory. The French, on the other hand, sent soldiers who were ill-prepared for the climate, sick with yellow fever, unmotivated, and poorly organized. Another key factor was ideology. For the slaves, this was not just a war for power or independence. It was a war for humanity. It was the first time that a group of slaves had fought not only for their personal freedom, but for the abolition of slavery in an entire nation. That vision sustained them even when death seemed inevitable. In 180, Napoleon Bonaparte, who had already seized control of France, decided to recover the colony. He sent a huge military expedition under the command of his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc. The objective was clear: to restore slavery and return total control to France. At first, the French troops made progress. Tim was captured through deception and deported to France, where he died in prison. But Napoleon's plan failed. Here another key leader enters the scene: Jean-Gines, much more radical than Toint, less diplomatic, but just as determined. Under his command, the Haitian armies not only resisted, but defeated the French once and for all. In 180, after years of war, disease, and attrition, Napoleon's troops surrendered. On January 1st, 1804, Delignes proclaimed Haiti's independence. Thus was born the world's first Black Republic, the first country to completely abolish slavery, and the first independent nation in Latin America and the Caribbean. It was something no one believed possible. A slave rebellion had defeated the French Empire. The whole world was stunned, but the mystery does not end there, because after that victory, new questions arose. If Haiti represented the ideals of freedom and justice, why was it isolated by the rest of the world? Why did the powers that be not immediately recognize its independence? Why was the history of this revolution silenced for so long? The answer is uncomfortable. Haiti represented a symbolic threat to all the slave-owning powers. In the United States, Brazil, and Cuba, the elites feared that the Haitian example would spread. European and American governments did everything they could to isolate, punish, and forget Haiti. France, in fact, forced Haiti to pay huge reparations to former slave owners, a debt imposed with guns and threats. That debt weighed on the country for over a century. At the level of historiography, Haiti was also marginalized. History books did not mention it. White revolutions, such as the French and American revolutions, were glorified, but the most impactful Black revolution of all was ignored. Only recently has it begun to receive the recognition it deserves. And even today, its history continues to fascinate. How did the slaves of a small colony defeat an empire? What sustained them in their struggle? What role did religion and African identity play? Ancestral memory? How did a disorganized rebellion become a successful war of independence? The Haitian Revolution is one of the great historical mysteries, not because of a lack of information, but because of its improbable success. In a world dominated by empires, plantations, and institutionalized racism, a nation of former slaves not only freed itself, but proclaimed itself a free, Black, and independent republic. It broke all the rules of the game, but it also paid the price. Haiti was punished economically, diplomatically, and symbolically for centuries. And perhaps that is why its history remains uncomfortable, because it forces us to rethink what we think we know about freedom, justice, and historical memory. Today, when we talk about revolutions, we often forget Haiti's. But if you look for the most improbable, radical, and powerful moment in modern history, it is there in the cane fields in the mountains of the Caribbean, where those who had nothing, no rights, no property, no future, dared to dream the impossible and achieved it. Among all the sacred objects mentioned in ancient religious texts, few have aroused as much fascination, speculation, and mystery as the Ark of the Covenant. It is said to have been built by direct order of God to Moses, to have contained the original tablets of the Ten Commandments, and to have represented nothing less than the divine presence on earth. It was worshipped, feared, protected, and revered for centuries by the people of Israel. But at some point in history, the Ark disappeared without a trace, and since then no one has been able to confirm its location. Its whereabouts remain one of the greatest enigmas in religious and archaeological history. The story of the Ark begins in the Old Testament, specifically in the book of Exodus. According to the biblical account, God commanded Moses to build an ark of acacia wood covered with pure gold. It was to have 2 cherubim on the lid facing each other and was to be placed inside the tabernacle in the so-called Holy of Holies. Their God would speak directly to Moses. The ark was not only a spiritual symbol, it was also described as an instrument of power. It accompanied the Hebrew people during their journey through the desert, guiding and protecting them. It was said that they marched into battle with it, and that their enemies fell before its presence. Later, King David wanted to give it a permanent place in Jerusalem, and his son, King Solomon, built the temple to house it. In the heart of Solomon's temple, the ark was kept in the most sacred place where only the high priest could enter, and only once a year. It was the most sacred object in Judaism. However, after this, its trail begins to fade. During the invasion of Jerusalem by the Babylonian Empire in 586 BC, the temple was looted and destroyed. Historical records speak of the theft of many sacred objects, but the fate of the ark is not clearly mentioned. From there, the mystery begins. It was destroyed by the Babylonians, hidden by priests, taken to another country, or it still exists, buried or guarded in secret by some unknown order. Over the centuries, many theories have emerged. One of the best known suggests that the ark was taken to Ethiopia. There, in the city of Assam, stands the Church of St. Mary of Zion, where Ethiopian monks claim that the ark is kept safe. Only one person is allowed to see it, a lifelong guardian who never leaves the premises and does not allow anyone else to see it. The faithful believe that the object has been there for centuries, brought from Jerusalem by Menelik, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. But apart from oral tradition and some ancient chronicles, there is no concrete evidence. Another theory holds that the ark was hidden under the temple in Jerusalem before its destruction. In modern times, archaeological and religious groups have attempted to excavate under the esplanade of the mosques in search of hidden chambers, but the area is so politically sensitive that no serious project has been able to move forward without causing tensions. Some even believe that the Vatican knows something or keeps secrets related to the ark. Others point to caves in the Sinai Desert, fortresses in Egypt, tunnels in Jordan, or even in Eastern Europe. In the 20th century, the popularity of the mystery of the ark grew even more thanks to popular culture. Films such as Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark brought it back to the center of the collective imagination. In the film, the ark becomes an artifact of supernatural power capable of destroying entire armies. Although this is fiction, the fascination it provokes is not exaggerated, because even in ancient texts, the ark is described as an object that caused illness, death, blessings, or disasters, depending on who touched it or how it was used. There were strict rules about its transport and custody. No one was allowed to look at it directly. Even priests had to cover it before moving it. Any carelessness could be fatal. And yet, despite its supposed importance, there is no modern historical record, biblical or archaeological, that explains exactly what happened to it. It is not even mentioned in the New Testament. It is as if it had vanished into thin air. Some scholars believe that it was simply destroyed, forgotten, or absorbed by time like so many other ancient objects. But others cling to the idea that it was intentionally hidden, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The most curious thing is that when searching for the ark, one is not only looking for a physical object, but also a connection to the divine. For many, the ark is not just a box of relics, but a direct manifestation of the covenant between God and his people. Finding it would validate centuries of faith tradition, and prophecy. For others, it could have political and religious implications of enormous proportions. Imagine if someone today claimed to have found it. What consequences would it have for the Jewish, Christian, and even Muslim worlds? What disputes would it provoke? Which symbols would collapse, and which would gain strength? The most skeptical archaeologists warn that the Ark may have been a symbolic object, or that the biblical accounts are more allegorical than literal. But even so, the search continues. There are expeditions still traveling to North Africa, to the desert, to tunnels and forgotten ruins, looking for clues, fragments, signs. Some claim to have found structures that could have been hiding places. Others claim to have secret manuscripts. But to date, no one has been able to produce definitive proof. The Ark of the Covenant remains a universal symbol. It represents mystery, the sacred, the forbidden, the lost. It is the embodiment of the question: can something so powerful disappear completely? Or is it simply waiting, hidden somewhere remote, to be rediscovered? The silence surrounding its whereabouts has been so long that there are those who believe it was never real, that it was a metaphor for the divine presence, that it was only part of the religious story without any concrete physical existence. But if that were true, why did so many generations search for it? Because the stories were so specific, so detailed, so full of instructions. The mystery of the Ark of the Covenant is not just that of a lost object, it is also the mystery of what we believe, of what we want to find, of what we are willing to imagine. Because even as archaeology advances, even as scanners penetrate layers of earth and rock, even as excavations continue to reveal temples and tombs, the Ark remains missing. And perhaps that is its true strength, not in what it contains, but in what it represents. A quest that never ends, a symbol that defies time, science, and doubt. An ancient echo that continues to resonate in every corner of the world, where someone wonders what happened to that sacred object that once contained the covenant between heaven and humanity. High on a hill in the south of France, in the small and seemingly insignificant village of Rennes-le-Cateau, lies one of Europe's most baffling mysteries. At first glance, this village seems like a forgotten corner, with quiet streets, a modest church, stone houses, and views of the Occitan countryside. But at the end of the 19th century, something happened there that caught the attention of researchers, adventurers, and conspirators from all over the world. It all began with a priest named Berenger Saunier, a humble man who suddenly began spending sums of money that were impossible to justify, lavishly restoring his church, building towers, gardens, libraries, and receiving mysterious visitors. And since then, the mystery has only grown. Saunier arrived in Rennes-le-Cateau in 1885. He was in his early 30s and was assigned as the village priest. The parish was literally in ruins. The church roof was leaking, the walls were falling apart, and the cemetery was a mess. Funds were scarce, and the village was poor. But a few years later, something changed. Suddenly, Saunier began to spend money like water. He completely restored the church, decorating it with statues, enigmatic symbols, and intense colors. He built a stately villa called Villa Betanie and a medieval-looking tower he called Torre Magdala. He also built greenhouses, gardens, paths, and lookout points, all without any known source of income. The question was immediate. Where did he get the money? Some said he had discovered a hidden treasure, others that he was blackmailing the Vatican, and still others that he had found secret documents capable of changing history, but no one could explain it with certainty. Saunier himself left confusing clues, altered accounts, and contradictory statements. When questioned by the diocese, he defended himself by saying that his funds came from private donations, but the records showed sums well above the usual amount. Something did not add up. The most intriguing detail emerged when analyzing the details of the church's restoration. At the entrance, Saunier had a Latin inscription placed Terribilis Locusis, which means this place is terrible or this place inspires fear. Inside, he decorated the baptistry with an unusual figure, the demon Asmodeus, crouching and holding a pile of holy water. Around him were cryptic symbols, misplaced biblical scenes, and a bewildering mixture of esoteric elements. It was as if he had wanted to send a hidden message, or as if the church itself were a code to be deciphered. Over time, theories multiplied. Some believe that Saunier found a physical treasure, perhaps hidden during the religious wars, or by the Knights Templar. Others claim that what he found were documents containing explosive information. The possible direct descent of Jesus from Mary Magdalene. This theory, although controversial, became very popular over time, especially after the publication of the book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and later with the novel The Da Vinci Code, where Rennes Le Chateau appears as a key location. The idea of a sacred lineage protected by secret societies, such as the Priory of Chaon, became a cultural phenomenon, albeit without solid historical evidence. But the story does not end with Saunier. After his death in 1917, his maid and alleged confidant, Marita Narnaud, inherited all his possessions. For years she lived discreetly, without working, maintaining the high lifestyle she had enjoyed with the priest. She often said that she knew a secret that would one day shake the church, but she never revealed it. In 1946, she suffered a stroke that left her unable to speak, and she died without telling anyone anything. What she knew was lost with her. Since then, Rennes Le Chateau has become a place of pilgrimage for curious people, researchers, and lovers of enigmas. Some dig secretly in search of tunnels, while others try to decipher codes in the church's sculptures. There are those who claim to have felt strange presences in the place or to have found hidden plans. No theory has been confirmed, but that has not stopped anyone. On the contrary, the mystery continues to grow. One line of investigation points to the possibility that Rennes Le Chateau is linked to ancient Templar or Cathar routes. There are numerous legends in the region about relics hidden during the persecution of the Cathars in the 11th century. There is talk of the Holy Grail, secret manuscripts, and lost knowledge. The geographical location of the village in a high and strategic area fuels this hypothesis. It could have been an ideal hiding place, a refuge for sacred objects or forbidden information. Other researchers have explored connections with alchemy, sacred geometry, and astrology. Some have measured alignments between the church and other structures in the region, claiming that they form deliberate geometric patterns. Others believe that the decoration of Saunier's church itself contains coded clues that reveal the location of something hidden. All this may sound fantastic, but the truth is that there is no simple explanation for what happened there. Even from an accounting standpoint, the data is confusing. Saunier was accused of trafficking in masses, accepting money to celebrate masses for specific intentions without actually celebrating them. But while that may explain part of his income, it does not justify the level of wealth he attained. Furthermore, during the last years of his life, the priest was sanctioned and removed from his ecclesiastical duties, but he never recanted or left the village. He died at home, still in possession of all his property. His final confession, according to some accounts, left the priest who heard him so shaken that he refused to grant him absolution. No one knows what he said, and therein lies the essence of the enigma. It is not just a story of unexplained money or yet another religious conspiracy. It is an incomplete puzzle where each piece seems to fit into several theories, but none of them can solve it completely. The lack of conclusive evidence has allowed each generation to project its own ideas about Rennes Chateau, the gold of the Templars, the lineage of Jesus, secret Vatican documents, mystical artifacts, and lost knowledge. Everything fits. Today, the town lives partly in mystery. There are souvenir shops, guided tours, and museums about Saunier, but the core of the enigma remains intact. What did that priest discover? Why did he spend so much money on strange symbols? What did Marion Arnauda tell his confidants in secret? Because more than a century later, Rennes Le Chateau continues to attract those seeking more than just history. The mystery of Rennes Le Chateau is not based solely on what is missing, but on what it hints at on that persistent feeling that something big was hidden there. Perhaps we will never know exactly what it was. Perhaps there is nothing, just a series of coincidences inflated by the imagination. But as long as there are symbols, silences, unsolved maps, and a church that seems to hide more than it shows, the question will remain alive, and with it, the enigma. In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of some of the earliest human civilizations, lie the remains of a culture that thousands of years later continues to raise impossible questions. The Sumerians, who lived between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers around 4000 BC, left behind an impressive legacy. Cuneiform writing, economic records, hymns, epics, monumental architecture, and a deeply elaborate view of the cosmos. But among all this legacy, there is something that has caught the attention of archaeologists, alternative historians, and theorists of the impossible. Certain reliefs and texts that, according to some interpretations, could represent transportation technology beyond human capabilities, an idea that has been dubbed the mystery of the Sumerian stargates. For many, this may sound like science fiction, but let's start with the historical facts. The Sumerians were undoubtedly a civilization ahead of their time. They invented cuneiform writing, built planned cities, developed laws, observed the sky with precision, and recorded complex astronomical cycles. Their gods, known as the Anunnaki, were part of a rich cosmogony where the divine and the human often intersected. And it was precisely in this relationship with the gods that the first signs of the enigma emerged. Numerous clay cylinders and stone reliefs feature intriguing scenes. Large human or semi-human figures, sometimes with wings, carrying circular objects in positions that some have compared to modern astronauts. Other images show arch-shaped structures, portals, or doors decorated with stellar symbols. Are these just religious representations, or is there something more behind them? One of the most daring and controversial interpretations is that the Sumerians had knowledge of a technology capable of opening portals between worlds, a kind of stargate connecting Earth to other planets or dimensions. This idea gained popularity in the late 20th century thanks to researchers such as Sekarian, who proposed that the Anunnaki were not gods in a spiritual sense, but beings from another planet, perhaps Nibiru, who interacted with humans in ancient times. Sikhin claimed that the Sumerian texts were not myths, but historical records. According to his interpretation, the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of resources such as gold and created humans through genetic engineering to work in their mines. To communicate between Earth and their home planet, they used a form of instant transportation called stargates. These were devices located at key points on the planet, capable of manipulating space and time. Of course, this view is not accepted by traditional archaeology. For most experts, Sumerian reliefs represent mythology, religious symbols, or epic narratives, not real technologies. However, there are elements that continue to raise questions. One of the most mentioned is a relief found in the ancient city of Ur, which shows a central figure in front of an arch adorned with astral symbols. Behind the figure is a group of people, some with fearful expressions, others in a reverent attitude. To modern eyes, the composition resembles the image of a portal or a dimensional door. Could this represent a transportation technology, or is it simply a metaphor for the passage between the earthly world and the spiritual world? In addition, several cuneiform texts describe journeys of the gods through the sky. There is talk of celestial chariots, mountains of fire, and lights descending from the stars. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, the hero travels in search of immortality and encounters strange creatures who are guardians of a secret passage where heaven and earth meet. All of this has been interpreted as spiritual metaphors, but some think that there are literal descriptions hidden between the lines. Another important source is the so-called Enuma-Elish, the Babylonian creation myth that has Sumerian roots. It describes a celestial war between the gods with powerful weapons, destruction of planets, and movements between worlds. Some have suggested that this text preserves distorted memories of technological events, as if oral tradition had transformed real events into mythological legends. Proponents of the Stargate theory point out that later civilizations also show similar representations. In Egypt, for example, there are inscriptions that speak of gates of heaven and the Duat, a realm that can only be reached by passing through portals. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Olmec spoke of star paths and connection points between worlds. In many cultures, the idea of sacred portals, points where reality opens up and allows passage to another place, is repeated. Could these similarities point to a common heritage? An ancient memory shared by civilizations that somehow had access to something beyond the human realm. Despite the speculation, the truth is that there are physical elements that are still not fully explained. Some carved stones show details that appear to represent mechanisms or cogwheels. Others depict ring-shaped objects held by salt figures, as if they were energy devices. Interpreted from a modern perspective, these details fuel the possibility that not everything is symbolism. However, it is also true that the human mind tends to see familiar patterns where there are none. It is easy, with 21st century eyes, to see technology in ancient representations. What looks like a helmet to us was a ceremonial headdress to them. What looks like a lever was perhaps a staff. What looks like an antenna was perhaps just a branch or a scepter. The fascinating thing about the Sumerian stargates is not so much whether they existed or not, but what they represent. They confront us with the idea that at some point in the past there may have been knowledge that we have now lost or misinterpreted, a more complex understanding of the universe than we assume. Some contemporary physicists, such as those working with multiverse or wormhole theories, have pointed out that interstellar travel could be possible if space-time were manipulated. Interestingly, that is the same conceptual basis behind the idea of stargates. And although science is still far from making it a reality, the conceptual coincidence is unsettling. So what are these Sumerian structures that look like portals really? Are they metaphors, religious symbols, or clues to something we don't yet understand? Could it be that, just like the cuneiform writing that took us centuries to decipher, these reliefs are waiting to be understood from a completely new perspective? The mystery remains open. The Sumerian stargates remain carved in stone, waiting beneath the sand while archaeologists and dreamers debate their true meaning. Perhaps we will never know for sure whether they were simple ritual symbols or whether, at some point in the distant past, they actually opened up to the stars. On a hill south of Edinburgh, Scotland, stands a chapel that at first glance looks like just another European religious building. But once you step inside and look closely at its columns, vaults, arches, and figures carved in stone, you realize that Raslin Chapel is something exceptional. Built in the mid-15th century, this small church has captured the attention of historians, mystics, occult scholars, and seekers of the impossible for centuries. Behind each figure and each symbol lies a question. Is Raslin a carefully decorated Christian temple or a repository of secret knowledge passed down by the Templars, the Freemasons, or even lost civilizations? The official history of the chapel begins in 1446, when William Sinclair, a Scottish nobleman descended from a powerful Norman family, decided to build a place of worship on his property. But what he had built was much more than a simple chapel. What Raslin represents, both for its architectural complexity and its mysterious engravings, has given rise to all kinds of theories, from the existence of hidden Templar treasures to the preservation of forbidden knowledge that escaped the censorship of the church. One of the first things that strikes you when you enter the chapel is the density of its ornamentation. Every inch is carved with figures, flowers, demons, angels, musicians, labyrinths, strange geometric motifs, and patterns that seem to have been taken from an esoteric codex. Many of these figures do not appear in any other medieval church. Some do not fit in with traditional Christian iconography, while others seem to represent elements that have no reason to be there. For example, on one of the side columns, there is a carving of what appears to be a corn plant. Corn is native to America and was unknown in Europe before Columbus' voyage in 1492, while the chapel was built decades earlier. How is it possible that an American plant is represented in a 15th-century Scottish chapel? Some argue that this could be evidence of transatlantic contacts prior to Columbus, possibly through the Knights Templar or Scandinavian navigators. Another even more disturbing example is the famous Apprentices column. This column, decorated with a spiral design that rises to the ceiling, has a legend accompanying its name. It is said that it was carved by an apprentice while his master was away, and that when the master returned, jealous of the perfection of the column, he murdered the young man. But beyond the tragic story, the column seems to have a symbolic meaning. Some say that its design represents the tree of life or even a molecular structure of DNA. For others, it is a visual representation of alchemical knowledge passed down in secret. The relationship between St. Rupert's Chapel and the Knights Templar is another of the most debated points. Although the order was officially dissolved in the 14th century, many theories maintain that its members survived in hiding and joined secret movements such as Freemasonry. The Sinclair family, who built the chapel, has traditional links to Scottish Freemasonry. According to some accounts, Drillin was designed to be a symbolic and physical repository for all the knowledge that the Knights Templar had accumulated during the Crusades, including forbidden texts, sacred artifacts, and even the Holy Grail. In some areas of the chapel, there are symbols that appear to correspond to Masonic iconography. Twin columns, compasses, squares, 8-pointed stars, angels forming geometric patterns. All of these have been interpreted as coded signs. There are no documents confirming a direct connection between the Knights Templar and the construction of Rassilon, but the symbolic coincidences have fueled the imagination of researchers for centuries. Beyond the Knights Templar, there are those who believe that Rassilon holds much older knowledge, the legacy of lost civilizations such as Atlantis or ancient sages who transmitted their knowledge in encrypted form to protect it from destruction. Some scholars have analyzed the arrangement of the figures in the vaults and found sequences that they say could represent musical notes. In 2005, a musician and a researcher proposed that the patterns on the ceilings of Rassilon represented a three-dimensional musical score and managed to translate it into a piece of music. The hypothesis was widely criticized by the academic community. But once again, it fueled the mystical aura of the chapel. Rassilon seems designed to invite interpretation. Every visitor sees something different. For some, it is a Christian temple full of theological symbolism. For others, it is an encyclopedia of esoteric knowledge carved in stone. Some compare it to Charles Cathedral for its symbolic richness, or to French Gothic buildings where architecture was a form of encrypted knowledge. One detail that has attracted attention is the astronomical orientation of certain elements. It has been suggested that the chapel is aligned with specific solar events or constellations such as Orion, which would link it to ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions. The possibility of hidden chambers beneath the structure has also been raised. Although some geophysical explorations have detected cavities, no excavations have been carried out of respect for the integrity of the building and its heritage value. Perhaps most puzzling is that despite centuries of study, no one has been able to completely decipher the meaning of Rassilon's iconography. There are no manuals, detailed plans, or direct testimonies explaining the exact purpose of each figure. Everything that is known has been deduced, compared, interpreted, and intuited. It is as if the chapel were a book in a lost language. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, Rassilon became the subject of books, documentaries, novels, and films. International fame came with Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, which presents it as the hiding place of the Holy Grail. Although this is fiction, the global interest it sparked attracted thousands of visitors and renewed the debate about its true meaning. The irony is that the more the chapel is studied, the more questions arise. Today, the Rassilon Chapel still stands, restored, protected, and cared for by a foundation. Masses are held, concerts and guided tours are organized, but silent research, searches for clues, and symbolic comparisons are also carried out. Because for many, Rasslin is not just a jewel of late Gothic art. It is a gateway to another way of understanding history, an echo of something that wanted to be said without words. It is possible that the chapel was built to preserve knowledge that could not be written down, a message through time, a warning, or a map. No one knows for sure. The only thing that is clear is that the Rasslin Chapel is much more than a church. It is an enigma carved in stone, a visual puzzle where each symbol seems to hide a story, and until someone manages to decipher it completely, it will remain one of the most mysterious and captivating places in the world. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, on Somerton Beach, near Adelaide, Australia, a man was found dead, leaning against a wall, with his legs stretched out and his feet crossed, as if he were resting. He was elegantly dressed in a suit, tie, well-ironed white shirt, and coat. But what at first appeared to be a simple case of natural death became, as the days passed, one of the strangest and most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. The Somerton man, as he became known, died without identification, without clear signs of violence, and without anyone able to identify him. Even more disturbing, a piece of paper with 2 words printed on it, Tamamsud, was found in his pocket. An enigmatic message that would start a puzzle that remains unsolved to this day. From the outset, the details of the case baffled the authorities. The body showed no visible signs of trauma. There was no blood, no wounds, no signs of a struggle. He was not carrying a wallet, identification, or any belongings that could reveal his name or where he came from. The labels on his clothes had been carefully removed, as if someone had wanted to erase all traces of him. In his pockets, he had a comb, cigarettes, a box of matches, chewing gum, a pack of expensive cigarettes tucked inside a cheaper pack, and nothing else. The body was taken to the coroner, who determined that the cause of death was probably poisoning, but there were no traces of toxins in the body, stomach, or blood. It was as if the substance had been perfectly undetectable, or as if there had been no substance at all. The possibility was raised that it could have been a highly sophisticated drug, capable of disappearing without leaving any traces. But even that was just a hypothesis. The real cause of his death was never established with certainty. The police began an exhaustive investigation. They compared his fingerprints with databases in Australia and abroad without success. His face was published in newspapers. No one recognized him. The press began to take an interest in the case, and the story of the nameless man captivated the public. Who was he? Why was no one looking for him? Why would someone remove any possible clues to his identity? Things became even stranger weeks later when a small hidden compartment was discovered in one of his trouser pockets. Inside was a carefully rolled-up piece of paper, cut from a book. On it were 2 words in Persian, Tamamsud, which can be translated as finished or done. It was the last sentence of the book Rubaiyat by the Persian poet Omar Khayyam, a work that speaks of destiny, the fleeting nature of life, and the acceptance of death. The discovery immediately fueled theories about suicide, planned murders, and coded messages. After appealing to the public for help in locating the original book from which the page had been torn, the police got lucky. A man came forward with a copy of Rubaiyat that he had found in the back seat of his car weeks earlier. To the public to locate the original book for which the page had been torn, the police got lucky. A man came forward with a copy of Rubaiyat that he had found in the back seat of his car weeks earlier, on the same day the body appeared. When a fragment found on the corpse was compared to the book, they matched perfectly. But that wasn't the most shocking part. On the back cover of the book, someone had written a series of letters in pencil in 5 lines, like a kind of code. In addition, a phone number was found. That belonged to a woman named Hot Thompson, who lived very close to Somerton Beach. When she was interviewed by the police, she seemed surprised but did not confirm that she knew the man. However, according to reports, when she saw the clay bust made of the deceased's face, she was visibly affected. Some officers believed that she recognized him, but decided not to say anything. Years later, some investigators pointed out that she probably did have some connection to him, perhaps romantic or personal, but preferred to hide it for reasons that were never clear. The series of letters in the book was analyzed by military cryptographers, but no one was able to decipher it. It did not match any known deciphered system. Some claimed that it could be a code for a message, others that they were the initials of a poem or text. To this day, no one has been able to find a conclusive meaning for that sequence. Over the years, multiple theories have emerged. One of the most persistent was that the Somerton Man was a spy. The historical context fueled this idea. 1948 was the beginning of the Cold War. Australia had close relations with the United States and the United Kingdom on intelligence matters. There was espionage activity in the region. The way the man had been found, with no identification, tags torn off, and no clear cause of death, seemed to fit the profile of a professional murderer. Others theorized that he was a rejected lover who had deliberately taken his own life, leaving a poetic and coded message as a farewell. It was also said that he could have been a war deserter, someone with a dark past, or even a messenger for some clandestine organization. None of these theories were confirmed. Over the decades, independent investigators, journalists, and mystery enthusiasts continued to search for clues. Documents were analyzed, possible descendants were contacted, immigration and military records were cross-referenced, but the case remained closed with the body buried in an unmarked grave. It was not until the 21st century, thanks to the development of genetic technologies, that the case was revived. In 2021, the exhumation of the body was authorized in order to obtain DNA samples and perform high-resolution genetic analysis. The remains were well preserved, and after several complex genetic genealogy studies, a possible name was identified: Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and amateur poet born in 1905 in Melbourne. According to the data obtained, Webb had disappeared in 1947 and his death had not been recorded. Coincidences with living relatives and genetic patterns pointed to him being the man from Somerton. However, even with a name, many questions remained unanswered. Why did he travel to Adelaide? What was his relationship with J. Thompson? What did the code mean? Why did he have a rebatiate? How did he really die? The discovery of his name did not solve the mystery. On the contrary, it expanded it. Because if he was an ordinary man, why did no one look for him for so many years? Why are there no previous photographs? What happened in the last months of his life? Some speculate that he may have reinvented himself, left his previous life behind, or been involved in an unexpected situation that ended in his death. Today, the case of the Somerton Man remains one of the most intriguing of the 20th century. A man with no name, no injuries, no known history, with a poetic message and an indecipherable code found on a quiet beach in southern Australia. It is a puzzle with loose pieces, where each answer seems to generate more questions. And although modern science has taken a step toward identification, the mystery of his death, his motives, and the coded messages he left behind continue to float like a shadow over the sand where he was found. Perhaps we will never know the whole story. Maybe the message Tamam Sud was more literal than it seemed. Everything is over, or maybe it was a clue to something we don't yet understand. In the meantime, the Somerton Man remains a symbol of the human enigma, a reminder that even in the information age, there are stories that defy explanation. In the middle of the Chihuahua Desert, in an arid and sparsely populated region of northern Mexico, lies an area known as much for its silence as for the mystery that surrounds it. Popularly known as the Zone of Silence, this place has been a subject of speculation for decades. It is said that radios stop working, compasses go haywire, television signals disappear, and even the fauna and flora exhibit unusual behavior. Some claim to have seen strange lights in the sky, experienced lost time, or felt an energy that is difficult to describe. Others speak of mutations in animals and plants, meteorites that fall with normal frequency, and a hidden history behind the phenomena recorded here. All this has made the Zone of Silence one of Mexico's greatest contemporary enigmas. Geographically, this area is located in the Mapamay Basin between the states of Durango, Chihuahua, and Coahuila. The terrain is inhospitable, hot during the day and freezing at night. There are no paved roads, no nearby cities, and no modern infrastructure. However, it is precisely this isolation that has allowed legends and testimonies about this place to grow unchecked over the years. The modern history of the mystery began in 1970 when a U.S. test missile, launched from a base in Utah, veered off course and ended up falling in this desert area of Mexico. The incident attracted attention because the missile, loaded with radioactive material, veered off course inexplicably. Mexican and U.S. authorities mounted a joint operation to recover it. During this process, some engineers and military personnel began to report that their radios were not working properly. Compasses seemed to lose their bearings. Communication signals were cut off. It was then that someone began to refer to the area as the Zone of Silence. From there, the legend began to spread. Soon, testimonies appeared from people who claimed to have lost track of time while in the area, as if the hours were passing faster or slower. Others claimed to have seen floating lights in the night sky, similar to spheres that change color and move silently. Some spoke of humanoid figures walking in the distance and suddenly disappearing. Suddenly, there were even reports of animals with strange mutations, such as turtles with deformed shells, rabbits without ears, or birds with unusual plumage. One of the most talked about elements is that the Zone of Silence is supposedly located at the same latitude as other mysterious regions of the world, such as the Bermuda Triangle or the Pyramids of Giza. Although this claim is not geographically accurate, it has served to fuel theories suggesting that there are points on the planet where natural energies behave abnormally. According to this idea, these zones would form a network of power points connected to each other by invisible energy lines, known in some traditions as ley lines. In the specific case of the Zone of Silence, it has been suggested that the place could have an unusual concentration of magnetic minerals underground, which would interfere with electromagnetic waves. It has also been suggested that the area is located above an ancient sea basin rich in fossils and ferrous materials that could affect electronic devices. Other hypotheses point to the accumulation of natural radiation from meteorites that fall in the region with apparent frequency. In fact, one of the most famous meteorites to fall in this area is the Allende meteorite, which fragmented into thousands of pieces and whose material has been studied for its age, more than 45 billion years, and unique composition. Some researchers suggest that these space rocks may have altered the region's magnetic field, causing anomalies that can still be felt today. However, this has not yet been conclusively proven scientifically. The fauna and flora of the area have also been the subject of interest. There are species found only in this region, adapted to extremely dry conditions. Some plants have peculiar shapes and colors, and certain studies have detected unusual genetic adaptations. This has led some to wonder if these variations could be related to radiation or some type of energy particular to the area. As for reports of strange sightings, there are many. Since the 1970s, numerous travelers, farmers, military personnel, and researchers have reported phenomena that are difficult to explain. One of the most popular stories tells of three tall, blonde, neatly dressed people who suddenly appear to offer help to lost travelers, only to disappear without a trace. They have been called the beings of the area, and some link them to extraterrestrial or interdimensional theories. These stories, although difficult to verify, continue to fuel the aura of mystery. Some scientists who have visited the site claim that radiation levels are neither dangerous nor unusual. Others say that radio and compass malfunctions do not occur consistently, yet the perception that something strange is happening there persists. What some consider suggestion or coincidence, others see as evidence that science has not yet explained everything. The spread of the mystery has turned the Zone of Silence into an alternative tourist destination. There are organized tours, small cabins for visitors, and local guides who recount the history of the place. The Mexican government, although it has not officially declared the region an anomalous zone, has funded conservation projects due to the biodiversity of the ecosystem. In the middle of the desert, there is a small research center where local species are studied. Local species and geological data is collected. Over time, the mystery has evolved For some, the zone of silence is a gateway to another level of consciousness. For others, it is an energy center or an ancient alien base. There are those who believe that there are structures buried under the sand, or that the place hides secrets that are not meant to be revealed. The internet is full of videos, chronicles, and accounts of supernatural experiences, with stories ranging from spaceships to contact with beings from other dimensions. Despite popular enthusiasm, there is no conclusive scientific evidence to date that paranormal phenomena occur in the zone of silence. Many of the reports of radio and compass malfunctions have not been replicated under control conditions. Others can be explained by the topography of the terrain, natural interference, or even simple errors of perception. And yet the mystery persists, perhaps because it appeals to something deeper than logic, the human desire to find places where the inexplicable is still possible. Perhaps the most fascinating thing about the zone of silence is not what actually happens there, but what it represents. A place where the rules seem to change, where clocks do not work the same, where words vanish into thin air, a point on the map where science and legend meet, and where, between the sand and the sky, the possibility of the unknown opens up. No,